A night in with MauLer and the drinker, getting trashed with the web screen dictors. A cheap night cause I'm feeling kinda thrifty, got a 10-pack of beers and a bottle of whiskey. Hop up the cork, have a glass of wine, pass fail safe, I'll be fine. Trouble walking in a straight line, but pour me a Pinot Noir. It's open bar with our hosts, MauLer and the critical drinker.
Well, I believe that's our cue to begin, MauLer. What do you reckon?
Hello. I'm here. It's been so long. 2 years.
I know. You've been absent for 2 whole years, man. I've missed you so much. It's good to have you back, my friend.
Thank goodness you're able to drink without me. It's
Don't ever leave us again, MauLer. I was just watching the intro there, actually. I've just realized we've got probably the most number of people on our panel tonight that are featured in the intro video. We've got Fringy, we've got Rob, we've got Platoon. We're doing all right with this.
No false advertising here.
I know, yeah. One day we'll just get everyone who's on the intro and we'll somehow find a way to bring them all in at the same time.
We are nearing episode 100, so...
Yeah, we've only got 6 more years before we get there, so we'll have to do our best. Actually, speaking of years, are you ready to hear some not so interesting facts about 1994? Since
I can't believe I missed
94.
By the way, complete coincidence. I missed in 93. It's like
like
birth year.
And some of the best movies as well. Like,
yes.
But okay, well, look, I will give you some facts about the year. So. Major events that happened in 93. Nelson Mandela became president of South Africa. Yay. Kurt Cobain died. Boo. Jeff Bezos founded Amazon in 1994. I mean, probably okay. And Friends premiered for the first time.
Wow.
1994. That is 30 years ago that started. It's funny. I saw some of the pictures from the first season. Like, wow. You can tell that was a mid-90s production for sure.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know, slightly... Actually, what we got here, on a movie side of things, top movies of the year, The Lion King.
All right, yeah.
295 million that grossed. I think that was its domestic. Then followed closely by Forrest Gump, 294 million, so really close. True Lies, good movie. The Santa Claus, I never would have put that in the top 5, but okay. And the Flintstones.
Wow.
Flintstones. The only movie that I ever walked out of in the movie theater.
The John Goodman one?
Yeah.
That movie's such a fucking weird thing that exists.
That is a trip, that film. I fucking hated it as a kid and I had to leave. I asked my dad, like, can we go home, please?
They betrayed the source material, Father. We cannot support this.
Indeed, yeah. It was a weird experience, but it was kind of a bumper year for movies as well. It also had Schindler's List, Pulp Fiction, Natural Born Killers, The Shawshank Redemption, Philadelphia, Stargate, Speed, Star Trek Generations, and Ace Ventura. So some good films in that year. Yeah. It was also the year in which the Sony PlayStation and the Sega Saturn were launched in 94.
Well.
Yeah.
History.
Indeed. So, yeah, some big things that began then. Not so much for the Sega Saturn, but, the PlayStation was the beginning of something quite big. I remember back in the day when you had to really make that gamble. Am I going to ask for a Sega Saturn or a PlayStation for Christmas? And fortunately, I chose wisely. But a few of my friends chose poorly. And they just gradually got more and more quiet about how their console was better. And then got a PlayStation ultimately. Sad times. Anyway.
Counts.
Yes. Anyway, I think we should bring one of your EFAP alumni on board, shall we? Do we say, like, bring the fring? Is that like the worst way I could phrase this, or what?
Yeah, he says that all the time. That's like his thing.
Yeah, it's catchphrase. Anyway, let's bring on board. Welcome to the open bar.
Oh my god, I'm here. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Bringing the fring today. Is that what we're doing?
Couldn't help but notice that when you were recounting the significant events of 1994, you forgot to mention that was the year Homer Simpson went to space.
Yeah.
I feel like that was a glaring omission. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I mean, I tried to cover every event that took place in that year.
Okay. A lot of things happened in 1994, so that's fine.
Yeah, yeah. I missed the O.J. Simpson thing out because on the grounds of poor taste for this. Anyway, yeah, welcome back to the bar, man. It's been a few months since we had you on, so it's good to have you back.
Thanks for having me back. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Next up, we have got Robert Meyer Burnett. He's a man who has a story for every occasion.
Well, it's always great to be here, and I've been using you in my intros for my own YouTube shows for the last couple months because you dropped my name on the Russell Brand show, which I am eternally grateful that you did. So thank you very much. I'd also like to add that The Crow came out in '94, and The Crow dropped this week in celebration.
Nice. That would be actually really cool experience to go see that in movie theaters again. Yeah,
they're releasing it at the end of May? I think it's here in the States. It's a great theatrical experience.
No, good movie. Such an interesting film. It was just way ahead of its time. But next up, we have got Little Platoon rejoining us for like the 500th time. Welcome back, sir.
500 times on Open Bar 94. I'm sure it makes sense somehow.
Well, you've definitely been in
500 years.
You've been in it since what, the 50s or 60s, so that makes you a multi-generational participant of the.
That makes you a boomer.
Yeah.
Oh God, I am, aren't I? That means I'm responsible for all the bad things ever until the millennials came around and made everything even worse. Yeah, no, I've been around for a good many old decades. I don't have any memories of 1994 though, because I was way too small to have those yet. But yeah, that's okay. That's the extent of my offering, I'm afraid.
Yeah, me, George, and Rob will just be the old people on the bar this evening, so we'll handle it. And last up, we have got George the Giant Slayer making his return. Welcome back to the bar, my friends.
Thank you for having me back. I was just looking up. Dakota Fanning was born in '94.
Yes. Justin Bieber was as well, apparently.
I can't believe it.
I feel like Dakota Fanning she played like the kid for about 30 years. And then...
Pretty much. Her best role, though, I would say, is Man on Fire.
Yeah, probably. It's the one I remember.
Yeah,
no, it's good to be back. Thank you, Drinker.
Oh, nice one, man. I had a bunch of things planned to kick things off, but something dropped today that was kind of interesting, and I was keen to get you guys' takes on it. There is apparently a new Lord of the Rings movie in the works. It's going to be The Hunt for Gollum.
On the back of the rip-roaring success that was the Lord of Ring Gollum, they've decided to capitalize into a film.
Direct adaptation. They're not going to change a thing.
So it's New Line that's working on this, isn't it? And it's David Zaslav that announced it. And he was saying that, it's going to have Andy Serkis returning to the role of Gollum, which is going to be a bit of a challenge because he's about 60 years old now. So good luck doing the mocap for that. But yeah, he said, for over 2 decades, moviegoers have embraced the Lord of the Rings film trilogy because of the undeniable devotion of Peter, Fran, and Philippa they've shown towards protecting the legacy of Tolkien's works. You know, like directly adapting the books that he wrote instead of going off on a tangent and doing a weird midquel story that's not actually covered in the books, but never mind. And to ensure audience could experience the incredible world he created in a way that honors his literary vision. We are honored that they've agreed to be our partners on these new films. So there's going to be 2 new ones. With Andy coming aboard to direct Lord of the Rings, The Hunt for Gollum, we continue an important commitment to excellence that is a true hallmark of how we want to venture ahead and contribute to Lord of the Rings cinematic history. That sounds lovely. The problem is they don't really have any source material to draw from on this one because I just recently reread Lord of the Rings, and I can tell you that The Hunt for Gollum is covered in about 2 paragraphs of Aragorn bitching to everyone about how much he stank once he captured him. It's not a really involved episode of the books, so it's
like that. You read that, and you're like, oh, movie potential, yes.
Because there's a ton of things that happen in the books that you could expand upon. There's like lots of fascinating stories there that you could tell. This is not one of them, I don't think. I mean, I could be crazy on this one. Call me crazy, but that just seems like an odd choice.
I wonder if they're going to be using the notes. That's the only thing I could think of because they've supposedly slated at least 6 films. They want to do the Strider adventures. Also,
good God, I thought you meant 6 films for Gollum.
No, I mean,
it's like a really long hunt, MauLer.
Yeah, well, after The Hobbit, he turned 1 book into 3 movies, so you could at least get 2 out of 2 pages. for Gollum. Yeah, it's going to be horrible.
I feel like The Hobbit is a really good example as to why this film shouldn't come out. If you don't have enough source material to fulfill an actual film, and so you just have to go and make up a load of stuff, and then you jam it all together, and then you divide it into 3 films, so you have to keep coming up with even more stuff that you're not drawing upon. We've seen how that goes. It doesn't go very well. That Peter Jackson was very good adapting The Lord of the Rings, but creating the Hobbit story was probably a mistake.
Do you think, though, Platoon, was that his fault, or was that Guillermo del Toro, who was originally the one who was directing it, and then they brought Jackson at the last moment?
I don't know. I honestly couldn't say. I think it's just misconceived from the off. You can't make 3 films out of The Hobbit. There's not enough material there. 1 film would do. And it's just a good example of people who are very, very good at adapting the works of other people who are not very good at creating something for themselves. So I'm not optimistic for the search for Gollum, or whatever it's called.
I think in terms of The Hobbit, probably if Peter Jackson had been involved right from the beginning, we would have had a much better trilogy. I still agree with your general point, though, that it wouldn't have been nearly as good as The Lord of the Rings because the source material just wasn't there. You had to start filling in a lot of gaps by yourself, and that's where a lot of Hollywood screenwriters come unstuck. And I suspect you would have had the same problem here, no matter who was helming the project from the very beginning. But yeah, this just seems like an even worse problem.
Well, at least it'll be better than the Rings of Power.
Sure.
I know that's not saying much, but
that's a low bar.
Yeah, I know. But I thought when you were mentioning today something breaking news, it's kind of like fits perfectly with that Apple commercial that came out. You saw that one?
Oh, wow, yeah.
Destroying, all of the things that we love.
Beautiful pieces of like culture and creative endeavor, like machinery that's like powered human culture for generations, and then this just gray monolith just crushes it all. And I thought that's a perfect encapsulation of everything that Apple is. But
I hearing that this film exists, I can see the image in my mind of a studio executive up on a stage at Comic-Con with a big display of a timeline of all of the Lord of the Rings franchise movies that they want to do. That's what I can see when I hear this announcement. It gets me really cynical.
Oh, yeah.
I think the real disappointing thing of all of this is where are our new franchises?
Yeah. We've got Rebel Moon, Rob. What more do you want?
I mean, look, I would say that one of the things that has come out recently that was successful that people like is John Wick. And John Wick did not cost a lot of money. They didn't know at first, they didn't know that it would have any beyond the first film, that it would ever have any resonance. And we've had 4 John Wick films. And of course, they might not have the timeless quality of the Lord of the Rings movies, but they were something new for our age. And I find it so disconcerting that the Lord of the Rings books were hermetically sealed. You've got your 3 books. And then, of course, you have the Silmarillion and all the appendices and all the other lost tales and all that. But those are not really narratives, so to speak. And so the Lord of the Rings was done. It's a essentially finished franchise. And now, I hate to say it because I've talked about this a lot, it's more fraudulent creation where you're trying to take something that has name value because the analytics like it, Wall Street likes it, whoever likes it, but there's no real, and look, I understand Peter and Fran and Philippa and Andy Serkis will do the best job they can to make the best thing that they can make. But ultimately it's a losing proposition because it's something that isn't really a part of the original author's intent for his story. And there's so many other projects out there, whether you like the 3-Body Problem or not. That was a new franchise or a new, that's an adaptation of a trilogy of books. And it's something new and unique. And there's something to be said for these kinds of stories. Every era has stories that are unique to that era. And whether the Lord of the Rings, was written in the 50s, 60s, and then it gets adapted into a film in the early aughts, it was when it was written and then when it came out. Where's the stories of today that are going to define today's generation that they're going to carry with them for the next 30 or 40 years? And I feel that our whole entertainment complex is moribund by this idea of chasing. I mean, we just got Ripley, a new version of The Talented Mr. Ripley that was done by Scott Frank, who did The Great Godless and adapted The Queen's Gambit, which were things we'd never seen before. And then he went back and adapted something we already had. And it seems to me what a waste of such talent.
But where are the Tolkiens of today? I mean, you have to adapt it from something because I think Hollywood can't create anymore.
Well,
Well, I mean, there's
George
other-
R.R. Martin had his shot at it, and then he
Yeah.
stopped writing books about 15 years ago. So
Yeah.
What's interesting is that it almost seems like there's a lack of recognition on the part of studios that the franchises of today started as just one original story at some point in time.
Mm.
Like it wasn't preordained that things like Terminator or Alien were going to become franchises. That was not,
yeah, and
that
like,
wasn't necessarily
It's a
even an
shame they did.
expectation. Yeah, well, yeah, of course. Hey, at least we got like one good sequel for each of them out of it. But yeah,
But-
it's
well, yeah, and like
you
look
gotta
how many
start
of them
with
got.
something
They all ultimately got franchised into the ground. Like
Yep.
Terminator, Alien, Predator. Like they've all gone. And same thing with Star Wars. I guess they tried to apply the Marvel model to it, and look where that ended up.
Well, yeah, now they're at a place where how valuable are they as franchises that they have at this point? I mean, if you make another Terminator film, is that going to make any money? I mean, at this point, I think it's safe to say that Disney is very concerned about whether or not a new Star Wars film would make any money. So I mean,
They
you
should be.
can't. Yeah, absolutely, they should be. And same with Marvel as well. And that's not a good place to get yourself in either. Of just, oh well, now you have nothing new that's like coming out to in a much more cynical sense, replenish the stock of franchises. But there should without that. Now, what are you going to rely on to allow you to keep existing?
Yeah, I mean, like culturally, our culture is now running on fumes because we've exhausted our fuel supply at this point, and yeah, they brought it on themselves ultimately. I do wonder if part of this decision to make more Lord of the Rings movies was at least partially motivated by Rings of Power and the failure of it, because they can essentially bring these out. It's like, look, the adults are back in the room. We're the guys that made the original Lord of the Rings trilogy. Remember us? We did a good job. You can like
Right.
what we do.
How long will that last, though? That's the thing.
I know.
They have
You can only play that card once.
Right, but
Yeah.
they got 6 films planned. They're going to see how War of the Rohirrim does this year because it's coming out.
Yeah,
That's the animated one, isn't it? I think
Yeah, that's
isn't
the
there
animated
something
one.
in the contract which basically says that you are obliged to make use of the IP that you have within a set time frame, otherwise that you lose the rights to it. I think I remember reading it a long time ago. That was one of the reasons that the War of the Rohirrim, for example, was coming out.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, most movie studios, when they purchase rights and they make a rights agreement, like they don't hold the rights for all eternity, because then that would just lock them up forever, and it would be a shit deal for the original owner. So yeah, they're time limited usually, and hence, yeah, every 10 years or so, you can just make a crap film if you want to retain those rights, because you're putting out something, and that's enough to start the clock again. It's a crap way of doing things, but it does work in some cases.
Well, at least
just-
for Rohirrim, they got Brian Cox. They got Brian Cox. They got a pretty good cast for it. So, I mean, it looks like it could be good. I haven't seen the script or anything.
Well, one of the things I find strange is that when I was in elementary school and junior high and first reading Tolkien, I also at the same time there were other fantasy series concurrently that people read just as much, like Stephen R. Donaldson's The Chronicles of Thomas Covenant the Unbeliever, like Lord Foul's Bane and White Gold Wielder, and all those 6 books were amazing. Piers Anthony's Incarnations of Immortality series, On a Pale Horse. These are things that we were all reading. And I've never understood, like, okay, in the wake of Lord of the Rings, there's all of these other, and I think they're relatively unknown, or people, they're sort of locked in development hell, but there's all of these other kinds or other great literary based franchises that no one's even delved into before. And I've always wondered, well, why we got the Shannara TV series, but other than that, not much.
I agree, Rob. I think there are great works of literature. Look at Michael Moorcock. Could you imagine a golden age of Hollywood doing like Elric of Melniboné?
I mean, Michael Moorcock is a perfect example, and they did adapt one of his works as a movie called The Final Program, aka The Last Days of Man on Earth. That's pretty the Jerry Cornelius story. But I'm surprised at how little they've delved into mid-century fantasy, because there was such great stuff that was coming out in the wake of Tolkien's work. And I think, as I hate to say this, but Terry Brooks's Sword of Shannara was too much of a repeat of Lord of the Rings, whereas the Thomas Covenant books are amazing.
They couldn't be filmed, though.
A couple,
Covenant couldn't
didn't
be
you?
filmed.
Like you had after, so around the time the Lord of the Rings films were coming out, massively successful. So you had then attempts to adapt Aragon, which failed. Narnia came back to the screen, which
Oh, yeah.
failed.
They're doing again.
I think there were a couple of other attempts, but like you can tell the difference there is just that it's the Star Wars effect. Star Wars comes out, it's really successful, and then all of a sudden there's a glut of films with the word "star" in the title. Sort of similar with Lord of the Rings. A lot of bad fantasy adaptations come out because the motive there isn't to do with the adaptation. The motive is to cash in on the genre buzz at the time. But then now we've got to the point where, you know, Amazon does Wheel of Time before Rings of Power, seemingly as a test case for like how badly can we fuck up a really much loved fantasy genre of, you know, many, many books. How badly could we change it and make everybody really annoyed? So they did that as a trial run. It was incredibly unsuccessful. And so they thought, right, it's Rings of Power time now. This will be even better than that. So even if we did look back and start saying, well, let's pick out your favorite long-running fantasy author of like the middle of the last century, you'd probably still get terrible adaptations just because that's the real problem. Well, there's two problems. One of them is that we are not producing the new things to adapt. The other problem is that we have no ability to actually adapt the things that we have, which is not an easy thing to solve.
So was Game of Thrones the last? Is that what you're saying? Like Game of Thrones in many ways is the last one to attempt to really adapt a book series well?
For at least 3 series. Until you get,
and you need filmmakers that are passionate. You need people that their mission in life is to adapt this stuff. And I think now, you know, when you have studios saying, okay, we're going to make this and we're going to hire them, which is how the showrunners of Rings of Power got their job. It's still, I don't understand, but it's got to be the other way around. It's got to be filmmakers that have a take that go to studios and say,
how often is that ever done now, though, really? Like, as Gary mentioned, like, so many directors now are cast rather than hired. Yes. They're just brought in to do this role. You know, they don't have an artistic vision that they pitch or anything. It's just a case of we need a guy to shout action.
Considering what was said earlier and now, I wouldn't mind getting an answer from all 6 people here, including me. But I would start maybe with Robert, because it's kind of the reason why I'm thinking about it. But the notion that, you know, where's our Lord of the Rings, where's our Tolkien's, where's our this, that, and the other, what do you think would be the unifying component that made, let's say, Villeneuve's Dune, Cameron's Avatar, and Snyder's Rebel Moon? All 3 of those cannot seem to fill any kind of hole even close to that, despite the fact that I describe all 3 of them as hyper passionate. And of course, we're drawing from very old and very beloved book series, a sequel of a franchise that was original, and then something completely original.
Oh, that's a phenomenal question. I think, you know, in this day and age, I don't know if it's as possible to be passionate. I mean, Villeneuve has famously said how many times that he read the books when he was young. And I think that as far as adaptations go, while perhaps not perfect, every frame you can see the love and passion put into those first 2 movies. And you know, they were relatively, Dune 2 is past 700 million. And I don't know if the subject matter would ever, it's not a 4-quadrant movie like an Avatar or Star Wars would be. It's definitely more geared toward an adult sensibility. Yeah. But I think, you know, you still look, where did we get Rebel Moon from? I think perhaps a creator that's not as literary minded as, say, Denis Villeneuve, you know, and I think that also I don't know if our culture would embrace something. Entertainment is so blown apart in terms of and there's so much out there. I think it's really difficult to make something that really touches the culture the way, like when Star Wars came out, there was nothing analogous to it in cinema history. No one had seen anything remotely similar to it. It was wildly different than anything that had come before. And it did rely on classical storytelling. And it was the perfect heady mix of all the different collaborators between producer Gary Kurtz, Marshall Lucas, you know, and Richard Chew and Paul Hirsch editing. You had people that were coming out of, I mean, Marshall Lucas was an editor on Taxi Driver. So the sensibilities took what George Lucas might have thought was a child's franchise, and they elevated it to being sort of this universal movie for everyone. I don't know if that's possible now. I honestly don't know, because our culture, you're just giving people variations on a theme. And how do you make something transcendent? I mean, the last time I went to the movie theater and my jaw hit the floor was seeing The Matrix back in 1999. And I went in thinking, oh, is this like going to be like Johnny Mnemonic? You know, and at that red pill, blue pill scene when Keanu Reeves wakes up as a human battery, I was like, my jaw hit the floor. You know, I'm like, oh my God, I didn't see that coming. As much science fiction as I read, I don't know if it's even possible to recreate that for an audience today.
I guess there's a lot to be said for being the first to do it and to tap into that market that's never experienced something like this before. And like you say, Star Wars succeeded because there had never been anything quite like it before. Now, when we're talking about big budget action adventure sci-fi movies with like incredible special effects, we've had a million of them. You're never going to get something that makes quite the same cultural impact. The closest we've had to like a unifying cultural event, I hate to say it, it's probably the MCU. It's the thing that like a lot of moviegoers were talking about. They were event movies. They were a story that most people who were interested in cinema were probably quite aware of and were following. That's the closest thing. Obviously, that's kind of self-destructed at this point, but it made the biggest impact. Avatar never did, weirdly, despite making insane amounts of money, because it's just pretty visuals, ultimately. It's just a lovely screensaver. Dune, as Rob said, wasn't particularly accessible to general audiences. It wasn't that 4-quadrant movie the same way that Star Wars was. So I can see why it still made a decent amount of money, and that's great. And it's good that it got the attention it did, but it was very much geared towards mature audiences. And with Rebel Moon, what the fuck? I mean, it's just a horrible, washed-out derivative knockoff of Star Wars. Just trying to ape the success of Star Wars made by a guy who'd never understood what made Star Wars good in the first place. So
it's insane, though, that he single-handedly is ruining the idea of a single writer-director with all the freedom and power and money. Like, the visionary artist. Like,
well, the thing is, I'm not a huge proponent of this anyway, because the person who can do all of those things equally well is so fucking rare that I don't want to see it promoted. I would rather have those things spread out and have really good people doing each thing and bringing it together into a unified like end product that's high quality, rather than every fucking director who comes along thinking, I'm going to be another like
Christopher Nolan.
I'm going to be the Renaissance man of cinema and just do everything. Like when I'm a shit writer and like borderline crap cinematographer as well. Yeah, just stick to the things that you're good at. Let other people do the things that they excel at. Because
I think they all want to be Christopher Nolan.
Yeah.
In many ways.
Well, it's a prestige thing, isn't it? To be able to say, well, I'm a writer, director, cinematographer, whatever else. I can do everything. That's an amazing thing to be able to say that you can do, but whether you can actually do it is a completely different question.
I mean, look at Kristen Stewart's her directorial debut. She's like, for my first movie, I don't want to make a movie, she said. She gave an interview 2 days ago. She goes, I just want to make something that shocks audiences. So I'm making a movie about incest, women's periods, and they're gaining their voice back. That was the whole premise of her film, Jesus and Dogs.
How did that work out for her?
Well, it hasn't come out yet, but it's like that. But you're talking about the prestige. She's like, I've always wanted to direct a film. And I went back to look at some of her interviews. They're like, did you ever want to direct film? This is like from 15 years ago. Oh, no, I have. No, I never wanted to. And then now it's like, well, I've always wanted to be a writer, director, actor, and do it all in one film. It's like,
I mean, you could probably argue it's like, well, my acting career is kind of on the downward. Yeah, so maybe I need to move into other things now.
Well, that was one of the things from the interview, wasn't it? She said that she would refuse to go and act in anybody else's movie until she got this one made, as though that's a threat you can hold over people.
You're threatening me with a good time there, Kristen.
But nailed it. That's exactly right. I'm not doing anything else. But my question is where are today's, right? Like outside of the MCU, at least for me, the phase 1 through 3, where are the films like Predator or Lady Hawk, Beastmaster, Conan, Dragon Slayer, movies that I'm sure today they would turn them into franchises, but they each stood on their own.
I mean, a lot of these ones that you've cited, though, like they weren't huge hits financially when they came out. Like a lot of them went on to become cult classics, which is great, but that takes time, and maybe we haven't had the chance to experience it. Shit, man, maybe 20 years from now, people will be looking back on Rebel Moon as like this amazing cult classic that they still talk about with reverence.
Like, does anybody think there's a movie in the last 5 years that will have the longevity of Jackson's Lord of the Rings or Lucas's original Star Wars, like in 50 or 100 years?
I will say no, but I'll caveat that like that's the hard. Like Lord of the Rings is exceptional. It's we want more of it, but we have to recognize phenomenal production. Like the idea that we get that again easily is not something that's within our grasp. We gotta like put so many things would have to change to make a Lord of the Rings trilogy happen again.
But then on the other hand, I would say that like a Godzilla -1,
Well, yeah.
here you take a 70-year-old franchise and you put it in the hands of people like the effects team. There was only one of my favorite things on YouTube of the last year was the effects team doing that 6-minute video of how they did the VFX. And you see this team of 35 people going all out and using all of the tools, the modern tools at their disposal, and then ancient, from the dawn of cinema tools. And they were able to create something and reinvent the Godzilla. Who would have thought that the Godzilla franchise could have found a new audience? And you see it juxtaposed between Kong versus Godzilla, Godzilla X Kong, and you can see the difference between what real creativity and love can sort of imbue into a franchise IP that's been around for a long time, and then an American version of that costs 10 times as much.
It's funny you said that because like they felt the need to gatekeep somewhat Godzilla fans. They're like, you guys are all posers. You're coming in with -1 and that's it. And Lil Platoon is already fucking smiling probably because he knows what I'm talking about.
I wasn't a Godzilla fan.
I was accused of being an evil tourist who came in expecting Godzilla films to not be shit. Sorry for that, but some of it's just like holding films to the same standard, even if they do have giant fairies in them.
Oh, 100%.
All I can say is I wasn't a Godzilla fan, and after I saw Godzilla -1, I had put in my review, I don't like Godzilla movies. Then I saw this, it blew me away. I have been watching all of them now.
Well, and we've got 2 franchise movies coming out in the next couple of weeks. This week we have Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, and that's a franchise that goes back to 1968, and then Furiosa, which is the 5th movie in a franchise that came to us originally in 1979.
I was going to ask about Kingdom actually, because I think some of the people on the panel here have seen it.
Yeah, I've seen it.
I haven't yet.
Tonight.
I was curious to know what your thoughts are on it, because from what MauLer told me, you're quite well up on the Planet of the Apes movies, like at least the remake ones.
I like them. I like the remake movies actually like a good deal. I probably like them more than they actually, like good. Those films have their flaws. Like they do have their problems with the writing, but I think that those films get carried by Caesar. I really like Caesar. I really, really like Andy Serkis's performance as Caesar. I like the idea of the character. Watching a trilogy where you see Caesar basically eventually become a man, like and have like that gradual transformation manifest in a variety of different ways, like from the way he talks, the way he walks, the way he interacts with the world and grapples with the world. Like that's really cool. This Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is kind of dull, unfortunately, which is like that's a shame. But I don't know that I was like super. I wasn't like highly anticipating this film. But yeah, it just comes across as like kind of like a dull continuation that when you compare it to those films, it's like it's lacking. Along with having a lot of the standard, like contrivances galore. And the characters are just not interesting enough to make up for it. They're fine, but nothing more than that.
I mean, I was going to say, because it really felt like the 3rd movie brought this whole storyline to a close. Like, they led the apes to, like, whatever their new home was going to be. The humans have been defeated. Caesar passes on the legacy to his son and then dies. That's it. That's your story wrapped up there. I guess I'm kind of confused as to where the narrative now goes.
I would say that the pitch for this film is fine on its face. It's the idea that we're moving, like 200, 300 years later to a world that is much more, post-apocalypse. The apes are, thriving in a sense, and humanity is kind of like, it seems like it's basically barely exists anymore. The idea of seeing an ape society that's like much larger and more organized. There's ideas there that are worthwhile, but I mean, I'd say the film dedicates like a lot of time to not exploring these ideas. It takes a long time before you actually get to what seems like the pitch of the film is. What does it look like when you have, you know, a much more organized like society of apes that have like these grander objectives in the world. But it's just not that present for most of it. It is kind of just like a dull adventure across the land before that happens, and it's all just strung together by, again, like a really long string of contrivances of like, man, if these characters showed up 5 minutes earlier or 5 minutes later, the whole movie doesn't happen over and over and over again.
Right.
So it's not. So Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, I thought it was going to be more like a callback to the original Heston Planet of the Apes. It's not.
It's very much like a continuation of the story of the reboot series.
Okay.
It's kind of like, you can almost view it. It's kind of like in the realm of soft reboots that we've had recently. You could watch this one without watching the reboot trilogy or, you know, the original films, and you'd be fine. But it definitely, to some extent, relies upon what happened in the reboot trilogy for its existence.
Okay.
But that's kind of the problem. Is like when you're watching the film, I'm just thinking like, man, these characters, I just don't find them as interesting as the characters that were in the reboot trilogy.
Is this
like the protagonist of, what's that? Sorry.
I know. I'm going to ask a question, but I'll wait till you're finished.
Oh, I was just going to say that I found, like, if you were to do a parallel between each of the new characters that have been introduced in this film, it's hard not to compare them to the ones that came before. And each time it's just like, man, you're not as interesting. Like the protagonist in this one, Noah, he's not as interesting as Caesar. He hasn't had as much time as Caesar, but I'd say that even Caesar in the first film, Rise of the Planet of the Apes, like even in that one, Caesar is pretty fascinating. And then it's the same for the new villain in this one, Proximus. He isn't as interesting to me as Koba. You can even do the comparison between the orangutans in the film. That the one that they have here, I don't like him as much as Maurice. Maurice was like the big orangutan, really chill, friendly guy. And it's like, yeah, each time I draw a comparison between those characters, I think, man, it's not that you're bad, it's just that you're not as interesting. You don't have as much, you know, flesh to them as characters.
Is this an attempt to kick off a new trilogy then, do you think?
I think so. Yes.
Right.
Very much baits a continuation of the story. In a sense, it's like complete, but it's definitely baiting a series. And I imagine at this point, because remember, this is Disney now, you know, this isn't Fox anymore. This is 20th Century Studios, so Disney. I imagine there's definitely a desire to turn it into a franchise, especially if it does well, which I think it probably will, but I get the impression it's going to be a very forgettable film. I would just be surprised, like if general audiences came away from it feeling like particularly satisfied. Funnily enough, when I was walking out of the theater, there was a guy behind me who was talking to his wife, and then she was like, "What'd you think of it?" And he said it was boring, and I thought, like, yeah, I could see people coming away feeling it's boring. It's for a 2.5 hour film, it doesn't achieve much.
Right.
Did it feel more like a television series, like it would stream better?
I don't know. I think I think it could have worked as a film with stronger characterization and a tighter plot and a greater degree of focus on, you know, I guess what you would say is like the thematic elements that you can draw from this world. But it's just it is not an expeditious story. It does not use its time particularly well. It doesn't use it like terribly. But it feels like they could have achieved a lot more with the characters and the premise in the time that they had.
In terms of the human characters, are they still afflicted with that weird virus thing that stops them from talking and stuff, or have they gotten past that? Is this?
So that's kind of the interesting thing about the film. In a certain sense, it feels like it progresses the world, but in another sense, it feels like it resets it. It's like you said, it felt like the conflict was kind of done in War for the Planet of the Apes, that it was kind of over, but now it's like being reset in a sense that there is you've got there are humans around, but most of them can't speak except for a couple of them. And that's kind of like the cell. So you've got one human character who's joining them on their adventures. And it was kind of interesting when I was thinking about the film. I was wondering, man, a lot of what was, you know, potent in the reboot trilogy was the interactions between like Caesar and the apes with humans and the conflict. Yeah. And so in the absence of that, you need to replace it with something that's stronger. And I don't feel like they did a particularly good job of doing that with the new like ape society that they created. They didn't feel like a good replacement for the interactions with human characters, especially with the differences between the interactions with the human characters in the reboot. Because the first film was when it was still modern society, and then in Dawn it was now post-apocalypse, but it was still it was like a civilian society that was in some sense armed. And then the third film, it was basically an army.
Yeah. It's a strange franchise, the Planet of the Apes reboot. Like, on the one hand, I think it's one I overlook as an example of a pretty good reboot of an old series, because the original, like the very first Planet of the Apes, okay, that was a great movie. Everyone remembers the twist. That was fantastic. They made many sequels, and most of them were pretty shit and quite forgettable, and we'd probably rather forget them. So this trilogy is interesting in that it remained fairly strong throughout the first three movies. Like they had their issues, but like generally I think they were quite good films. I was just never invested in them personally. It was a weird experience where I was watching them, recognizing like, hey, as a technical achievement, this is remarkable. Like the performances are fantastic. The motion capture is excellent. Caesar's a well-developed, very interesting character. I just never quite got into them. I was never really that bothered for them. You know, I watched them and then just kind of moved on. So it's kind of an unusual thing.
Kind of approach them. I think it's Caesar, and Andy Serkis, like portraying that character, as well as the meta, right? Of isn't it cool that you have this actor who is managing to be very convincing in this role, and then also the conversation about whether he should have been nominated for that, like in some sort of category, right, for best actor, but not interested in doing that for people who do motion capture for whatever reason. But yeah, I think they're viewed favorably, but it doesn't seem like they've made a huge impact. And I think this film will make far less of one.
Yeah. What's interesting to me about the Apes franchise is when I was a kid, the two franchises pre-Star Wars that I love the most were Bond and Apes. And the Apes franchise, you didn't know about the diminishing qualities. I mean, if you go back and watch the R-rated version of Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, it's pretty amazing from today's perspective. That's the fourth film. But what I really liked about the reboot trilogy is that it didn't, like, you can watch the original Planet of the Apes, and then maybe you could watch all three of this new trilogy, and then watch, say, Beneath the Planet of the Apes, and it works beautifully. They dovetail very nicely into the original five films, which I think is pretty interesting because this is a franchise that's been around since '68, and the five original Planet of the Apes movies had a lot of social commentary. I think today people would scream that they were woke, even though at the time they really, I mean, when you watch Conquest and you've got Caesar calling for revolution, and you watch the R-rated version, it's pretty amazing to watch that. And this is what we were watching. Hey kids, watch the Go Ape Festival this week on whatever TV channel, and you'd watch these five films, and I'm watching them at 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, and I'm like, these are the greatest movies ever. And I had no idea what a lot of the subtext of what was going on, which is not exactly.
I just want to.
I remember watching the War for the Planet of the Apes. I think that's the one set in the future where the humans try to retake the world. And the ape army's going off to battle, and there's literally apes standing there with like placards saying like "No war" or "End the war now."
Yes.
It's like, okay, the political allegories here are fucking heavy-handed, man.
Yeah, they really are. And that was the movie that was made because kids. That was really a movie that was, believe it or not, Battle for the Planet of the Apes was made for kids, and it was made with not very much money because kids loved apes. I've always said there's the only thing better than dinosaurs for kids is apes on horseback with rifles shooting humans. And I firmly stand by that.
I like how in all this discussion, nobody's acknowledged Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes.
That was wretched.
So bad.
The only thing I remember from that was Estella Warren just being really fucking hot.
Yes.
I don't think she went on to great things either. Not, I don't know. Maybe she was like the Sydney Sweeney of her time or something. We didn't quite appreciate her.
Wasn't that with Wahlberg?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Tim Roth was the bad guy, right?
Yeah. He was actually really good.
I liked it in the sense that was the last one to use practical effects for the ape makeup and costumes and everything. And it looked pretty good.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Rick Baker.
Didn't they even have Charlton Heston, who was almost dead by that point, come in to do a little cameo?
Yeah.
As like old ape.
Yeah.
He does he says the line, "Damn them all to hell."
Damn them all.
I
think
probably
that
would have
might have been
enjoyed
what
this
killed
film
him.
more if they started singing about Dr. Seuss and then one of them started breakdancing. Like
Yeah,
at some point in the film, that would have been a good idea, I think.
just
Rock me,
yeah.
Dr.
I
Zayas.
hate every ape I see, from chimpanzee to chimpanzee. I just wanted to read out this little super chat here as well from Matt PG for $50. Says, cheers to all. Just love it when I get home early and get to see Open Bar live out in the garage on the big screen. I'm loving the mini retrospective that you do at the beginning of the stream. I'm 46 and it's great to relive the 90s. Thanks, man. I appreciate that. And I don't know how that came about, that we started doing like pointless facts about each year, but it
What's
started
gonna
a few
happen?
years back.
It will be what, like 30 plus episodes that we will run out, right? Or you have to
I'm just going to
resell.
start making it up then.
Oh, there you go.
It's like 2030, Drinker gets declared emperor of the planet Earth.
But it will be funny to get to like the 124th episode where you're like, so what happened in the current year? Like, well,
We're working on it. But yeah, no, it's kind of interesting to get this take on Planet of the Apes. I mean, I'll probably see it at some point. I don't know if I'll go to the movie theater to see it, but I'll find it.
I mean, there's elements to it. Like, I don't think it's a bad film. It's got a cool spectacle. There's some just good like art direction in general. It's got that going for it. But if someone asked me, would you recommend it? I'd be like, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I would. Like I said, I think people might come away from it feeling it was kind of boring.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not sure I'd be on that. Whereas with the reboot trilogy, I would recommend watching those films. I'd say, yeah, you watch them, you'll like them. They're entertaining and they're interesting, and I like Caesar.
No, fair dues, man. Fair dues. There was another thing that I wanted to cover here. This was originally going to be what I led with, but our conversation went in different directions. But yeah, it was talking about The Fall Guy, released like a week ago, and it's kind of underperformed, and it's on track to not really make any money for the studios. And people are a little bit perplexed by it because it should have been one of those 4-quadrant movies that kind of pleases everyone. It's an action comedy. It's got Ryan Gosling, who's kind of red hot at the moment in Hollywood. Emily Blunt, who's a very popular actress. A fairly easygoing story, and it came along at that early May release date, which kind of kicks off the summer movie season. And yeah, it's really underperformed. And there was an interesting article that came out from Screen Crush, actually, saying, what the hell do people want out of movies now? And I think that's a pretty good way of phrasing it, because there's been a lot of complaints, obviously, in previous years, like, oh my God, stop just churning out superhero movies. Stop giving us remakes. Stop giving us reboots. Stop giving us endless sequels. And okay, this is a movie that hypothetically ticks all the boxes. It's an original IP. It's not a superhero movie. It's not a reboot. It's got, pretty likable stars in it. It's just a generic sort of action comedy. Doesn't try to go into too many other genres. And yet people aren't watching it. And it does make you wonder why. What are they missing here?
Well, think about it. Besides the prices, how much trust has been broken by Hollywood and the audience? I mean, it's not easy unless they hear it from friends and friends and friends, or from you and everybody, they trust on YouTube to go, oh, this is a phenomenal flick.
I mean, yeah, but then you got big movies like Oppenheimer and Barbie last year. Like, they can still succeed. It's just, I don't know what they're missing. It's the same deal with that Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. Similar idea, where it's like an action film with comedy elements, pretty likable cast, nothing too offensive there. Should be kind of a crowd-pleasing movie. Again, big flop.
I know it's been talked about before, the concept of, does the movie star even exist anymore? The person that you can attach to a film, and it basically guarantees that it'll succeed because people want to watch it just because they're in it. And feels like people would have said Ryan Gosling is one of the few people who fills that slot or comes close to it. Which is interesting that this film comes out with him and Emily Blunt as well, who's popular. And like you said, a pitch on its face that seems pretty compelling of, yeah, you have fun. It's an action movie. It'll be great. And it's a bit of a romantic comedy as well. And yet for it to not make much of an impression at all is a bit strange. It is a little bit strange.
It is, but I really do believe when you look at the price, it's like, I don't know what it is for y'all, but like when I go to a movie, if I was going to take my girl, it's like for two people, right? You're going to look at least $60 just for tickets. So something has to move you, or you have to have people tell you that's great. I think the only movie stars really left are like Tom Cruise and Denzel Washington. Because if you put Ryan Gosling right now, this is just my guess, under any title of movie, do you think people will go see it because of Ryan Gosling? But typically when you put Cruise, people pack.
Well, I think that's kind of the interesting thing about this
typically.
film, right? Is that this film it's not working. So
Right.
I mean, I guess it's
Well,
that's kind of illustrating the point.
Let's not forget, it didn't work for Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning
That's
Part
true.
1.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that film.
But I
didn't
also-
pay its money back, I don't think, or maybe
I mean,
just.
you could
Yeah.
argue perhaps that Mission Impossible was just kind of swallowed up by Barbenheimer as well, and
Mm.
just perhaps
But
if it had
isn't
been
that
in a
fascinating though? Mission Impossible Fallout made like $800 million. It was a massive. I think in retrospect you can say they should have moved, but at the time I don't think they should have thought that they needed to move out of the way for Oppenheimer. I don't think they could have known what was going to happen.
I also
really-
think Dead Reckoning just isn't that great. It
Well,
doesn't
yeah, it's
make
one of the-
Yes,
correct.
Yeah.
It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and they freely admitted they were making it up as they went along. They didn't have a script to shoot from. But in the case of
You could tell.
The Fall Guy, one of the things that Hollywood marketing, I think the real problem with the marketing departments today in Hollywood is they don't know their jobs.
Oh.
And it used to be that the marketing department, there was a guy who was at Lionsgate named Tim Palin. And he was a photographer himself, and he worked in marketing at Lionsgate and would design the campaigns for like the Saw films and the Hunger Games movies, and really talented, visionary marketing guy. And I think nowadays, the people at the studios, at least in marketing, they don't know how to develop an innovative marketing campaign. They're relying on, just like so many other people do, what came before. And they don't really know. They won't look outside their box. And I think when you watch the marketing, or you look at the marketing of The Fall Guy, it's very generic. Like they're showing you this stuff, and they're not telling you. Marketing has to tell you, why should you, as a fan of movies, or you want to have an entertaining time at the movies, why should you leave the house and go see this particular film in a theater? What is it? How is seeing this in a movie theater better than waiting to see it at home?
Right.
And I'll tell you something. It's really interesting. If you look at the Marvels, which is their Marvel's biggest disaster, it's doing quite well on streaming. Because people looked at that movie, and whether you like the Marvels or not, it's still doing incredibly well for Disney streaming. But that movie had no reason. It was a TV show at best, and there was no reason to go see that movie in a movie theater, whether you like the MCU or not. And they have to tell you why. They have to make movies that you have to go and see in a theater. And The Fall Guy is a very well-made movie. I think it's actually a very satisfying time at the cinema. But the marketing didn't tell you that. The marketing has to tell you why. Why should you leave the house to go see this?
The marketing was fairly insubstantial, at least over here in the UK. Like I
Generic.
didn't really, and then there just wasn't enough of it. There was no TV commercials really. There was no billboards for it that I could see. It was not on the sides of buses or anything. It wasn't made out to be a big deal. And I know the movie wasn't a mega budget film. Like I think it was 140 million, which is a lot of money, but compared to most blockbusters now. But yeah, it just feels like they put no effort into marketing it, and it's kind of a shame because it is a pretty fun film. It's not perfect by any measure, and it's definitely a switch your brain off kind of film. But I liked it.
I haven't seen it. Is it like a popcorn movie drinker? Is it like a Saturday afternoon popcorn? I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I mean it's not a spectacle or anything really. It's like a bit of a crime caper action comedy kind of thing, like where your protagonist is a stuntman, so he's got to use all his stuntman moves to get out of fights and everything.
Gotcha.
Gosling's pretty likable in it.
Cool.
Well, so I've seen it, and I didn't like it. I found it's one of those movies where it's like you can't you have to turn your brain off, I think, to like, you have to just be like, yeah, it'll be fun, you know, watching have stunts and then having jokes and stuff like that. Because I mean, you actually think about the way that the plot's constructed.
Oh yeah, the
insane.
plot is nonsense.
The plot is a
yeah,
mess, and the characters are kind of crazy as well. You know, they're kind of like these sort of caricature, like absurd characters who don't react particularly like consistently or logically to anything that's happening. It feels like it's very much a film where it's structured around, we want to have a reason for action and stunts, and as well as meta commentary on like the film industry as well, which it offers. I suppose what I'm curious about is, how well do you think that film sustains a conversation between people who've seen it? Like, that they'd get out of the theater, how much do you think it'd be on their mind, that they'd want to talk about it, and that those conversations would compel their friends to go watch it?
Well,
there's not a whole lot to say about it.
That's sort of the point, though, isn't it? That makes it, in a sense, a not particularly remarkable story, in the sense that what you have is generic film doing generically at box office. What's remarkable about it is that studios seem to think that generic prospects can be worth spending $120, $130 million on producing, and then putting it out in the cinema, expecting that they will get more than that back in the box office. If you'd spend a half of that amount of money, maybe you'd be looking at a profitable film, and that's probably about the amount of money that the concept and the idea deserves. But I think probably for the last sort of 10 years, when you look at the way the box office breaks down, and actually overall it's made a huge amount of money. But then if you look at how much is being taken by anything that isn't Marvel, Avatar, Jurassic World, it's generally quite a small amount. The health of the broader box office is not great at the moment. And that's probably because like all of these eggs are being put into very, very few baskets. But the impact of that is that studios are saying, well, any given new property could theoretically earn us $1 billion. So of course it's worth spending 150 to try and put one out. That's not ever. I don't think that's ever been how cinema has worked, is it? I mean, look at the number of forgettable Sylvester Stallone action films.
Right, but they were usually more like, they'd end up on cable where either they became cult classics or we ended up talking about them, making fun of them. But I think there's also another factor in here, which is at the same time that you have Fall Guy coming out, you still have this, like Rasmussen put out a poll 5 days ago where they asked 3,000 people what their response was, how they viewed Disney first. And they said in 2022, 38% of the people viewed Disney as an unfavorable company. Today, it's 48%. And they said, how do you view Hollywood studios in general? And they view most Hollywood studios in a generic sense up to 51% unfavorable. So I think you're having a rise of people like who are the normies are starting to wake up, and they see that comedy die. Then all of a sudden they see the Netflix comedy roast for Tom Brady, and they're like, oh, things are coming back. Or they hear Jerry Seinfeld comedy's dead, and they see one movie after the other flop. They turn on their television, they see one bad series after another. I think they're just holding on.
Well, I think particularly though with this film, there's obviously been a lot of criticism of Disney movies and perhaps Hollywood movies in general, that they push political agendas, they're preachy, they're annoying, and it's pissing people off. This movie is the antithesis of that. There's no agenda here. It doesn't really push any messaging. It's just a generic kind of action comedy movie. And you would think that would be a welcome relief for people. To say, hey, just a big budget movie that's not trying to like drive home any social political commentary on me. It's just there to have a bit of fun.
I think
that's
people want
the
more
paucity
today
of that argument, though, isn't it? I mean, that was always the problem. Whenever you criticize a film that people sort of vaguely, slightly like, I think this was true of Avatar: The Way of Water, I think, and probably also Jurassic World Dominion. Like it comes out and it's not very good, but some people like it, and you say, well, and they will tell you, hey, at least it's not pushing an agenda on me. At least the film doesn't hate me. And I've heard this so many times, and I keep trying to say this is not a standard. If that's how low your bar is, then you should raise your own bar. Just to say that it doesn't hate me, therefore it's good, is pretty whack as a like an audience metric. And I think the paucity of that argument is revealed by the fact that just not hating your audience is not enough to make a film make a huge amount of money, because that shouldn't be enough to make a film make a huge amount of money. It should be the bare minimum requirement. That's enough to get some people to go and watch it. It's not enough to get lots of people to go for repeat viewings.
Yeah, because it sounds like a cable or streaming movie is what I'm hearing. Like that's what it sounds like.
It's not an event movie, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're missing, events. I think we're missing events.
I think perhaps as well, like Emily Blunt is not necessarily a big box office draw. I really like her, and I think she's a popular actress, but I don't know if many people go to a movie because Emily Blunt's in it. And perhaps the same problem with Ryan Gosling. I think he's almost like a movie star by default right now because he's been in things like Barbie, and like generally people seem to really like him, and he seems to like a good sport, and he's like, you know, goofing around at the Oscars and stuff. And that's all great, but it's just like, I don't know if he has really a big track record of box office hits that he's starred in. You know, when I think about the movies that we know him from, they're generally Drive, Blade Runner 2049. None of them were huge earners at the cinema. And it just makes me wonder if they've perhaps overestimated his box office drawing potential.
Yeah. He's been in a lot of niche films. I forgot the director, the one where he was in Thailand, or was it, or Singapore? That bloody one.
Again, not a criticism of him. I like him as an actor.
I agree.
I just wonder if like he is necessarily the movie star that people just kind of naturally assume he is now.
Was Majors in it? Was Majors in The Fall Guy? Like doing a cameo from the TV series?
Like a post-credit scene or something.
Gotcha. I feel like it's worth mentioning. Drive was 13 years ago. Like, that's not. Times are different for sure by now. What I guess I'm saying is that Ryan Gosling wasn't even as popular back then as he is now. But I think all evidence points to the nature that of what we've come to conclude before, which is the selling a movie based on a movie star is an era that's been over for some time. Because Tom Cruise seems to be the only exception people used to highlight. But like I said, I feel like Mission Impossible killed that mystique. Everything was going for that film, and it didn't do what it was supposed to do, to the point where they're renaming the part 1, part 2 thing now.
But I think they're going to come back soon. I think
they'll come back. And
Gina Carano was talking about that last week, I think, on FND, only because she made this comment where she was like, a lot of the actors that she knows, the celebrities, she said, are starting to retreat from social media. And I think social media is one of the things that helped kill the movie star, because you ruin the mystique, and you need the studios to pull those actors back so people don't interact with them any day or every day and hear their opinions. But
here's a question, I guess, on the subject of, well, why did The Fall Guy, why is it not doing so well? When people say, I want to see more original films, do they mean it that much? It feels like a question that needs to be asked, because if people keep saying it, and then, a film that seems to satisfy all of the criteria on its face comes out and people don't watch it, it's like, well, how much does it really matter to you, when you say it?
It's like it's necessary, not sufficient, right? I mean, it would be nice to see more original stories, but the Kristen Stewart one we were mentioning earlier is an original film. I can't imagine there are that many people champing at the bit to go and see the incest period film. It's like you also have to, produce something which is worth seeing. Like every time you sit down on the toilet, you make something that is unique. But it doesn't mean you necessarily want to sell it.
It's Snyder, right? He was saying with Rebel Moon, right? You have to, a vote against me, right? As a vote for like Sludge Factory films. That's a false dichotomy, isn't it? I have to watch your bad films, otherwise I get other types of bad films. Like, it always needs to be the pitch that it's a good film. But I suppose I get the impression that like most people who'd watch The Fall Guy probably come away with it being like, yeah, I enjoyed that. That's the impression I got. I didn't like it, but
that was exactly my impression. Yeah, like I came away like, it was all right, and like moving on with my day. Didn't really think about it again after that.
But did you talk to anybody about it afterwards, Drinker? Like where you're like, oh, I want to really.
Well, that's the thing. No, it's not a film that inspires strong emotions. I don't think it would be. If someone asked me about it directly, like, yeah, have you seen The Fall Guy? I'd be like, yeah, it's pretty good fun. It's probably worth your time.
I remember coming out of John Wick. I must have talked to 20 people. I was like, when I first saw it. And it's not a movie that's, that's going to inspire.
Well, it's interesting that the films that we've seen recently that kind of ended up being breakout success stories, like Everything Ever All at Once, that's very much a word of mouth is what propelled that film to success against all odds. And I'd be curious if this film would have that kind of word of mouth.
But the thing about that is it showed people something they really hadn't seen before, and I think people, I think what's interesting about something like The Fall Guy is, like you said earlier, some of you were saying, why would you spend $150 million on this movie? Which the rom-com genre used to be sort of a venerable, always working genre in the theater because it wasn't expensive. And, you think about Everything Everywhere All at Once was relatively inexpensive. Even the first John Wick, relatively inexpensive. And with Hollywood making these, like the studios are spending why aren't the studios looking at, say, the lessons you learned from horror? Paramount makes a smile for a $20 million spend, and it makes $200 million globally. I mean, I would think that's, I know they don't want to live there because that's not what Wall Street wants them to do. But if you made 10 movies that cost $20 million and each one of them turned a $100 million profit, I know it's only $1 billion because they want 10 billion, but still that's a viable business model. And Hollywood is in trouble because they've put all their all their eggs in the streaming basket, which isn't working out because you have to spend enormous sums of money that it's unbelievable. And they're not getting any kind of a return. And it's the theatrical movies that do well that then later do well on streaming, or even theatrical movies that don't. You know, I said earlier, you can look at somebody in the chat asked, how do I know how the Marvels is doing? Well, there's analytics. It's been number 3 in certain streaming. If you look at the ratings, quote unquote ratings. Well, it's, you know what it is? It's the mother and daughter audience that made the first Marvels a success. It's people that, like, no one knew who Miss Marvel was. You put her on a theatrical poster, it's like, wait, who is that? You know, Polaris, or I mean, Monica Rambeau was my Captain Marvel in the 80s in the Avengers comics, and it's weird that she's not. They went with the Carol Danvers version, but you know, it's nowadays we live in a world where everything is so blown apart that you got to think, like, what are people expecting from? Not every movie can be $150 million spend, which add another $100 million of marketing, and the studios only get back half of the box office. Very few of these movies that they're making are profitable.
But then, how do you explain anybody but you?
I got was an 80% failure rate for Hollywood movies.
What kind of business can sustain that? They can't.
But
well, it's the tentpole movies that make like $2 billion that end up propping up so many other failed projects. That's the weird, you know, economics of it. It doesn't make much sense to us because we don't have to deal with it.
It didn't used to be that way, though. I mean, studios would give you in a year, you'd get a rom-com, you'd get an adult thriller, you'd get a biopic, you'd get an action film, you get a science fiction movie, you get a few horror films.
Yeah, I mean, this is a perfect example, right? This movie did not need to be $140 million. You could have done this for half that easily.
You did it for 65, you've got a hit.
Yeah,
maybe. Worldwide, at least.
But then how do you explain something like Anyone But You, which was made for $25 million, is already past what, 210, 216? The one with Sweeney, the rom-com.
I could think of a couple of reasons.
Yeah, besides the Double D Harbingers, besides those breasts. But I'm saying that's a lot of money. 25 million to 216.
Is there any?
It's a rom-com. Did you say?
Right. Yeah. It's supposed to be a romantic comedy.
Well, yeah. I mean, rom-coms are relatively rare these days, and maybe it's just a little oasis in the desert of entertainment. And like, you're going to get that female audience. They're going to go see it. They're going to want to see the rom-com aspects. The guys are going to want to see Sydney Sweeney.
Boobs.
Jennifer Lawrence one that came out, like, I want to say a year ago, 2 years ago, something.
Yeah.
It was
no.
I think that was
no hard feelings.
Yeah, that's what. Like, I assume that did terribly. Like, I wouldn't have any reason to explain the Sydney Sweeney one beyond Sydney Sweeney. I've got nothing to know why.
Yeah, I couldn't figure it out because there hasn't been rom-coms lately that have made that kind of money, especially off a tiny budget.
Yeah.
Do you think it has anything to do with streaming? You know, the conversation about what kind of films would somebody say, I want to go to the movies and pay potentially a lot of money to sit in the theater, watch it on the big screen versus, well, now I can watch it on streaming. So, you know, I'd rather watch it on streaming. Like, if that's had any impact on the types of films that can be successful at the box office.
What do you think, Platoon? You think it's just the Sweeney effect or people wanted a rom-com and it's just been a while?
I mean, rom-coms do quite often do, surprising numbers. That's because just social contagion effect on women was my assumption. It's the reason there's another Bridget Jones film in production when they've not been funny since the first one, but I think they're doing another one. It's a film that sounds like it knows its audience, appeals to the audience, and lo and behold, if you give the audience what they want, they will come and see your movie and give you lots of money. So that sounds fairly normal, I suppose. But like, is there any sequel bait or anything in the Fall Guy movie? Is that trying to set something up for the future for itself?
No,
I don't think so.
Really, no,
I don't think so.
I think it's one and done.
Yeah. I think, you know what, I think they might have done better if they'd leaned harder into the behind the scenes insights into making movies, because obviously it's based around stunt performers and stuff, and I get the impression like they're quite there's a lot of goodwill towards stunt performers and like the work they do. Like the movie highlights a little bit of that and like the risks they take and like the sacrifices they make in terms of injuries and stuff. And that's quite cool. It touches lightly on it though. And I think if it had made that more of a core element of the story, and perhaps given you a better insight into the shit that goes on movie sets, that might have actually been a more interesting film. But it's really just a distant backdrop to the main events of it, which is just like a murder mystery plot, essentially.
Actually, imagine that being a pretty funny movie. It's a low budget film about a stuntman for low budget films. Like just like the complete manic nonsense, the like incredibly risky shit that you have to go through with like no equipment or anything like that. You could do a funny film with that, I'm sure.
I think Burt Reynolds did one once, didn't he, Robert?
He did Hooper.
Hooper, that's right, Hooper.
When the guy who directed Hal Needham, his great friend, they made a whole series of movies. Not a lot of them were great. Hal Needham also directed Megaforce.
That is such a cool name. Megaforce.
Megaforce. That movie was not good. Summer of 1982.
Surprisingly.
It's although you look at it now, there's some hilarious stuff in it. But I don't understand why a genre of movie that you look at Ryan Gosling, 20 years ago, starring in The Notebook, which was, it's not a comedy, but it was, you ask the ladies, what is a romantic film a lot of them love? The Notebook has sort of become a classic of that genre.
That.
And that was really,
Notebook,
that kicked off, Ryan Gosling's career, I think. And I just find it strange that, again, like, I don't know what you guys thought about. I thought Bullet Train was a fun, serviceable romp of a movie. I mean, it did not aspire to great things, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, it was fun to watch. Same director, and I understand why they thought that something like that. They had a great package with The Fall Guy, but again, I think the title was a problem because it's based on an '80s TV show that not very many people now remember. If they had titled it something different, maybe. Because I don't think a lot of people even understand what a fall guy is. I mean, it's sort of a double entendre in a way. You've got the idea of a stuntman literally being the fall guy or the fall guy for a crime. I don't think people quite even understand what that was. And maybe with another title, but you can't, that movie at that price. I mean, this is another problem for the studios. I don't think they know how to make movies at a reasonable budget to suit the material. And that's been a real problem. And that's, people are wondering what's going on with Hollywood. It's like, look, Hollywood is profligate spending everywhere you look, and it's not working. The business is in a shambles.
Let me just read out a couple of super chats before we move on, because we've got a couple of biggies that came in. Blaze Stone for 50 Canadian dollars says, I agree that movie standards need to be higher than I Don't Hate You, but we need to reward any steps in the right direction so long as they're decent. No, not shit, but at least decent. I think that's probably how I would define The Fall Guy. A relatively fun, inoffensive movie. Not a great script, but not terrible either. That's also not hating me. So that's probably the step in the right direction that I would cite. And I agree with Platoon in the sense that I'm not going to watch a movie that's objectively crap, but as long as it's not got political messaging or whatever in it, then I'm going to give it a good grade. Like, it needs to be more than just that, but it certainly represents a step in the correct direction. So I guess I'd like to see more of that. But yeah, how about also making good films at the same time? That'd be nice. Another one here was Casey Boyd for $100 says, I saw Predator and Snatch last week for the first time. I couldn't believe how smooth the flow of those movies were. Snatch was fast at first with a lot of characters, but it all fell into place. In Predator, when Dutch gave a war cry with the torch, that was my favorite part. That's very cool. Oh, I like that.
Snatch is beautiful. I love it.
Yeah, Snatch is great fun.
How Pitt did that pikey, the way he spoke, I don't know how to.
Oh, the pikey accent.
Yeah, it's just brilliant.
It's Irish with a bunch of random gibberish thrown in there as well. But yeah, it's weird to watch movies like that and then to watch Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare and like, yeah, this is made by the same guy. It's like one is so much slicker and faster and more energetic than the other.
But The Gentleman reminded me a little bit of Snatched, of pieces of it.
It's got more more of Snatch's DNA in it. I think
Yeah.
that's more his comfort zone, I suppose.
Definitely
John
not
Gate-
King Arthur.
No. I don't know why they put him in charge of that. John Gates says, speaking of streaming, are recent studio closures at Xbox a condemnation on the streaming model in gaming when compared to their competitors who didn't spend $80 billion on IP in recent years, but are still seeing more success with less PC support to boot? There's the Microsoft has closed a whole bunch of their studios in recent days.
Yeah, they closed Tango that made Hi-Fi Rush, Evil Within. I think they also closed Arcane Austin, which made it was Redfall, the game that nobody liked, the Vampire Hunter co-op one that everybody hated. And I think 2 other ones as well. Amid many layoffs this year in the gaming industry, there's been a lot of layoffs.
I think we're going to see a lot of that over the next year because it's not like a video game crash or anything, but we're seeing a period of big contraction because the gaming industry had become so fucking bloated and so overdone. The budgets were insane by this point, and like the studio bloat that comes with that was unsustainable. So I think there needs to be a period of trimming the fat. Sadly,
well, I suppose something that's been evoked from the conversation is I think the day after, I can't remember who it was, but someone at Xbox said, "Yeah, we need more small games." It's like, oh, like Hi-Fi Rush from that studio that you closed. Like, it's like a lack of realization that But I think it seems like in the video game industry, like especially in the AAA space, the budgets have gotten insane, where you need to sell millions and millions of copies to be successful. And there's only so much space, there's only so many people playing video games and only so much time in the day.
You've also got, at the same time, you've got that move to try and get more and more and more and more and more people onto like PlayStation Plus and is Xbox Live is the Microsoft equivalent of that. So like you're trying to, on the one hand, increase the budgets for AAA and also sign more people up to a service where they pay much less over a much longer period of time and just hope that they stick around enough to make up the amount of money that you're selling on AAA games, which is just, it's sort of not dissimilar to the way that movies are spending so much money on like Secret Invasion, expecting that Disney Plus will ever make that amount of money back from Secret Invasion over the long run. It's not going to happen. It's a very silly model, but you can see some of the logic behind it.
I like how they phrased it recently at Disney earnings call that like Disney Plus is getting a little bit closer to making a profit. It's still not there, like 4 years down the line, but it's getting closer, guys.
Maybe
just losing less money than it used to.
Yeah, you had even participant media studios close this week, and you saw like George Clooney come out, Alyssa Milano, Martin Sheen, Ava DuVernay. They're like, we need to have studios like this to make movies like this because they made like the polar bear needs to shave because the ice is melting, Food Inc., a lot of stuff like that.
But they made movies like Contagion too.
They did. There were a couple of good ones, but they were primarily that, echo chamber porn.
Yeah. Rob, I was keen to get your take on this actually. This is an interview with Alex Kurtzman just over the past few days. Alex Kurtzman says there's an infinite number of Star Trek stories out there to tell, but new shows must be authentic.
He takes a drink.
Boy, oh boy. I mean, and you were the one that gave me mad props in the pop culture space for saying that. So once again, I thank you. Here's what I find strange about Alex Kurtzman's entire involvement with the Star Trek franchise, which began back in 2009 with Star Trek 09. All he's ever done with his Star Trek shows is build upon what was done before. And, let's go back and do a prequel to the original series. Let's tell, even though they put it in a different universe, let's go back and retell a story of Khan, but do it badly. Yeah. And then he was a producer, but I don't believe he wrote Star Trek Beyond. And then he basically usurped Star Trek Discovery from the original creator, Brian Fuller. That's a prequel show. Strange New Worlds is a prequel show. Star Trek Lower Decks is a show about people that apparently have only ever watched Star Trek. And then, you've got your Section 31 show that's taking away from Deep Space Nine and Star Trek novels that they've pillaged. And when he says authentic, I think that you go back and you look at what they did with Star Trek The Next Generation, where there was a concerted effort to take this franchise and bring it back, and no one thought it would work. Even Patrick Stewart's agent said, take the job. You'll do 13 episodes in LA. You'll get a tan, and that'll be the end of it. They can never recreate it. And admittedly, the first 2 seasons of Next Gen are rocky, but they made a concerted effort to go 100 years in the future, and everything old is new again. And you don't even see, other than DeForest Kelley in the pilot, you don't even see really a direct sequel to a previous Star Trek episode. Well, you've got the Naked Now, but to see a character, Mark Leonard's Sarek, who's Spock's father, the same actor came back and played in a beautiful Star Trek episode where what happens when a Vulcan, like what they did in Logan, loses control of his mental faculties. How does Alzheimer's affect a Vulcan, and what does it mean? And it was a beautiful episode done so well, and they used a legacy Star Trek character in an amazing way. That to me is authentic. And that was done by people that really knew what they were doing. And I watch these modern Star Trek shows, and I wonder, what are we supposed to take away from these shows? Because I don't think that there's no character authenticity. There's certainly no authenticity when it comes to the Star Trek universe. There's no fealty to what's come before. They've never tried to make it credible. They've said, well, we're doing a visual reboot and all that. They've never looked back at original Star Trek and said, well, let's go back to the Berman era, which went from 87 to 2005. They don't look at those. As a matter of fact, I'm dubious as to anybody have they ever watched those episodes, except given a cursory glance to maybe Next Gen or something. It's very strange. I mean, even this season of Discovery is a basically pseudo sequel to a 6th season Next Generation episode. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. And it's like, why are you not telling action adventure, science fiction, allegorical tales about our world today? And that's what,
I just don't think they have the intelligence and the creativity to do stories like that. Like when I look back to the Next Generation and some of the pretty interesting episodes that they tackled, the interesting themes that they took on, a lot of it was relevant, obviously, to the world at the time and still very much today. They did it in an intelligent way. It was thoughtful. It was often about seeing different perspectives on a problem. And I just feel like Star Trek now can't even approximate that. It's not even about that anymore.
No.
And it's become just like Star Wars, where it's a dumb show made by dumb people, arguably for dumb people. And I don't really know what the draw is anymore with it. There's nothing that would encourage me to watch Discovery at this point.
It's no longer about, Star Trek was really about, I hate to say it, but about the elite, the best of humanity. In order to be out there amongst the stars, to boldly go, you had to be the best of the best. You had to be in the 99th percentile to get through Starfleet Academy to be on a Federation starship. And that's what it celebrated. It celebrated competency. It celebrated vast intelligence. And it was always aspirational. I wished that I could be, when I was watching Star Trek as a kid, I wished that I hoped to be able to grow up and work with these kinds of people. Now they've made everybody mundane and the same, and they're average. And you're watching, that character's just like me.
It's the next door neighbor problem. It's the next door neighbor problem.
I don't want to watch a show about people that are just like me. I want to watch about people I dream of one day being like.
Yeah, but they're wacky and they backchat superior officers and they're joking around in the middle of emergencies on a starship that could get blown up at any moment. That's funny. It's like, fuck off. Like, Star Trek's meant to be a bit more serious than that. It's meant to at least be serious science fiction. And that's what I never get the sense of when you get shows like Discovery. Strange New Worlds, never even bothered with it. Apparently it's the same problem. Lower Decks, it's just a goofy kids show. And there's no way I'm going to have any interest in watching something like Section 31. Kurtzman's had a hard-on for that concept for like the past 10 years. Never managed to get it going yet. Apparently it's in the works now. And not to mention Star Trek 4 is apparently still happening.
Really?
The strange thing about their version of Section 31 is they see it as an intelligence organization, but it's not. It's really the deep state. And if the deep state exists, that's what Section 31 is. And they're like, no, you have your own headquarters, you've got your own membership cards, you've got special lapel pins, and where you're wearing black. And it's a bizarre misunderstanding. I mean, when Section 31 was introduced, it was one guy, who would when Dr. Bashir would wake up, the one guy was sitting next to his bed, played by Bill Sadler, the great Bill Sadler. And it was creepy and strange. And you wondered, are they really real? And the whole idea of Section 31 was, what is this exactly? I mean, they were kind of terrifying, but they completely changed all of that in Discovery. And really, you look at that and go, did you guys pay any attention to what any of this is?
Do they now have like an evil looking base where they all convene and there's like a volcano in the background? Or something?
I mean, they did. They had a space base with an evil AI. And the whole reason the Discovery jumped 1,000 years in the future was because of this evil AI that was a product of Section 31. First of all, it's like all of these concepts that you see in modern Star Trek are well-worn concepts from science fiction TV. You know what it is? I firmly believe that everybody working in genre television today grew up watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel, and their entire storytelling abilities were derived from those two shows, and they're just applying it across the board. Somehow something like The Boys would get made, which amazes me that it exists, but all of these interpersonal relationships all come out of what Joss Whedon was doing in Buffy and Angel. It hasn't changed, and they're just bringing it forward 20 years, and every science fiction, fantasy, horror, it's all generic shows, and the characters all talk to each other like they're in high school above a hellmouth, like they did in Buffy. All of it. It's all the same, and it's just because that's what they watched. It's like, read a science fiction book. Read Werner Vinge's A Fire Upon the Deep. Just one book. One big sci-fi sprawling novel would help you all learn how to write decent science fiction, but I don't think we've ever read one.
Trying to picture MauLer's face to hear that Star Trek Discovery is being compared to Buffy.
I know. He's going to react here.
Yeah, but I was listening to Robert, so I didn't get confused as to what he was saying, which I assume is that they're all bad copies. And they're
all horrible. They don't understand. I mean, that kind of the interpersonal character relationships in Buffy and Angel, to be fair, are Tiffany. They're the highest level of that kind of storytelling. And these characters, I mean, the writers who are writing these things are using that as their template, but none of them really understand why it worked as well as it did. And they're trying to apply it to everything. And it's like, guys, Buffy and Angel, don't even try and attempt that, because you can't do it.
Well, it's funny, right? Because like Buffy and Angel had a huge influence to the point of I've got a friend going through Buffy and Angel right now who's familiar with Doctor Who reboot, and they were saying like, man, there is so much of Doctor Who in this.
100%.
Yeah.
See, that's what I mean, and that because they're the gold standard. Those two shows, they really are. And I would even throw in a little bit of Firefly, although it's not maybe nearly as successful, but. I mean, it's and the way that everybody wants to recreate those character dynamics, and they don't know how.
Well, and it then happened again, right? The Avengers 2012 set the stage for what the formula would be, and a lot of people, depending on the era we're in, will say Avengers was terrible and it ruined everything, or everyone tried to copy Avengers and that's what ruined everything.
Yeah,
I think the copying probably.
On the science point as well, I think is another interesting one, because you can read essays from Isaac Asimov. I think he published it in the 1950s, complaining that there's this growing trend to remove all science from science fiction. There's this belief amongst science fiction writers who sort of come up, particularly after the 1960s, that science is in some way a bad thing, and science fiction is a really good genre in which to make that point. And so you compare like any given old episode of Star Trek where they actually took care to try and, they tried to keep abreast of whatever the latest scientific discovery was, to Star Trek Discovery, which has no time for it, because Star Trek Discovery is way, way, way more interested in the social sciences. And there's a kind of an unwritten rule, which is that if you put the word social in front of any other thing, it means the opposite of that thing. Social sciences aren't really science. Social justice isn't really justice, etc. But they're very, very interested in the interpersonal dynamics. I think that because it's easier for them to do, right? Like all you have to do is just sort of crib a little bit from Buffy, or imagine that it's your incredibly witty best friend and you're just having like, this is your idealized self talking to your idealized best friend, and it's quippy and it's chippy and it's all very fast-paced dialogue and that's it. But there's no room for actual technical science because that requires research and it requires hard work to actually find a way of fictionalizing that and putting it into an entertaining story, which you can do, and you can, some of the best stories come from that, but it does actually require a level of knowledge that I don't think these people are even interested in trying to get.
100%. 100%.
There's a great quote from Kurtzman here actually talking about this. It says, "It's such an incredible gift because the truth is that when we started Discovery, I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about making a great show." Well, mission not accomplished. And I fell so deeply in love with Discovery and with the process of making it. And I spent a lot of time that first season really kind of meditating on this incredible universe that's been around for so long and how much more can be done with it. How many amazing stories are to tell. There's really an infinite number of stories to tell. And what you produced was the worst of them, I would imagine.
Well, I think the frustrating thing with Star Wars and Star Trek and all of these big franchises, they have a whole series of novels that have been written. And a lot of the novels aren't great, but the best of those novels, whether they're Star Wars novels, whether even video games to a certain extent, the stories that they're telling, people did not start writing Star Trek novels because they wanted to get rich. They loved Star Trek. And I would dare say, here's a Star Trek novel called The Final Reflection by a guy named, he's passed away, John Ford. There is more about the Klingon culture in this novel that, by the way, Ron Moore took from to do the Klingons in Next Generation. This is a standalone novel that you can really pretty much read. And the same with Star Wars. If you go back and you look at the Dark Empire comic series, which Rise of Skywalker certainly, I would say, cribbed from and badly, it's frustrating to see writers who have already done their bit and created great stories that they could use to draw from. I've never understood. You've got hundreds of great novels to go back and mine, and now they're doing it, but not giving the authors credit.
Yeah.
And Strange New Worlds and Discovery have both been guilty of doing that. And
Didn't Discovery gets sued by like another sci-fi writer who claimed that they stole the idea of the spore drive from it.
yes, that was a game. A game. The whole thing about the creature what are those things called? But yeah,
Tardigrade.
yes,
Yeah, the warp drive runs on like intergalactic space fungus, essentially.
Yeah. And that character, the tardigrade character, was actually a main character in Brian Fuller's original conception of Discovery, he was more like Chewbacca, who worked with the character of Stamets in engineering, and his name was Ephraim. And it was kind of interesting that this tardigrade character was going to be one of the principals on the show. And of course, they turned him into what they turned him into. So, and the spore drive was actually, it was in Brian Fuller's series. The whole idea of the spore drive was actually not a spore drive at all. It was the mycellular network was all about terraforming. They were using mushrooms and the mycellular network to terraform planets, which is why the character's name, he's named after Paul Stamets, a real scientist who has studied fungi his whole life, and which they also used in an episode of Hannibal.
Yes.
But of course they kept the character's name without any understanding of who that character was based on, which is so weird. Right. I mean, as if there's a spore network in the universe. There's a fungal network in space. No, that was all about terraforming. Oh, well.
Well, gentlemen, there was another thing I was curious to get your takes on. So we've had our first glimpse of Superman in the new James Gunn version of the DCEU. And, well, the reaction to it has been kind of interesting. We've got him. I actually used a variation of this as the thumbnail for this video, but yeah, people.
It's that laser, man.
Doesn't it remind you?
Bugging me. What is it?
Yeah, I don't know. It reminds me a little. It's weird. It reminds me a little bit of one of the outfits in the video game Injustice: Gods Among Us.
It looks like a really crappy cosplay. Like the suit looks wrinkled, and it looks. It looks like a fake muscle suit. Like the guy who's in it isn't really that big, and so this is like to try and bulk him out. It's the sort of thing you would see at a convention or something.
Right, but is he trying to tell us that he doesn't care what's going on in the background?
That was my read. It's like a
like-
giant, massive electric pink sperm cell can't be very important to him because he's just very casually lacing his boots up.
I know.
Yeah.
And
I've
he
seen
also
people
looks-
speculate over the emotional state is like that of he's at a second act low point, you know. And I'm just sitting like, why release an image that requires that kind of context to enjoy as a moment?
Especially,
why can't he be
First
standing on the top of a skyscraper looking heroic or something, you know, with the stars and stripes in the background? Like you know, what you'd associate with Superman.
But is it me or does he look a little bit like Cavill in that shot, like in the face? Because I'm like, why hire someone that has that kind of like essence of Cavill when keep Cavill?
I mean, yeah, ultimately everyone who plays Superman is going to look somewhat similar because it's the nature of the character, I suppose.
Right. But doesn't he look a lot like Cavill in the shot? Like the face? Or is it just me?
A little bit, yeah. There's a resemblance there.
I just want to chime in, and now I'm going to be called a corporate shill, I know, but this, as James Gunn pointed out, this was a random on-set photograph of the actor between takes, and it's not a promotional photograph. It was just capturing what he looked like at the moment, literally, you know, putting on his boots.
With
So
a giant
this is
space laser behind him.
Well, yeah, that's all
happening.
like that was in the background on set for whatever reason. But I think that one of the fun things about this is I think he was trying to take a real world shot that is not supposed to be necessarily indicative of what you're going to see in the movie, but it's almost there's something going on, I think, in this picture that the still photographer captured that James Gunn liked. So, having been a veteran of being on a Superman set for a year, the entire time it was being shot, when Brandon Routh was first photographed and they made the first picture that they released, it was an actual photography session where he was taken out by the still photographer, and it was lit, and they did like a photo shoot to have an officially released photograph. I think the reason James Gunn released this is because it was a candid moment that Cornsweet didn't even know he was being photographed by the still photographer, and that there was something in here about Superman that James Gunn saw. I don't want to speak for him, but it's just what he said when he released this on Threads, this picture. So he said, my still photographer actually captured this during the middle of production one day, and I didn't even know that they did it. And I saw this, and I thought,
surely
I really like
he
this.
recognized, though, that like this would get shared around and people would be like, this is the first look at Superman in the new DC universe.
Yeah, I know. I thought I can't speak
on
to.
his boot with a giant laser in the background.
But is it
Not only should he be aware that that's how it would be seen, but he should also be aware it should then in turn be seen as though most people will not know the context of that release and assume James is showing us this to give us an implication of the character.
Yeah.
That's what most people will assume.
Well, and I think there's two things to draw from this. One, you know, the reaction has been so negative, and I wonder if that's indicative of a general dislike towards this movie. You know, the general mood amongst the fan base is like, oh, we don't want another fucking Superman movie with another, like, a different Superman. And so we're just looking for reasons to get pissed off and mock this one. And two,
could be people are tired of the reboots.
I think so.
There is a bitterness that exists. There's not undeniable toward DC right now and their failures. Their many, many, many failures. And we're not hoping to see another one. So yeah, this film's got a lot of fucking work to do if it wants to win.
It has to be great, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I think, like, you know, James Gunn's general perception, I guess, like his public image is a guy who is, you know, willing to be a bit subversive and have a bit of fun with his concepts and doesn't really take his superhero stuff too seriously. Like, I know the third Guardians movie had some pretty heavy moments in it, but his general tone is to like have quite a lot of fun with it and just mock it and not really get too earnest with it. Whereas that's the antithesis of what Superman is. It should be super earnest. It should be taking itself seriously as a superhero movie. And I wonder if that's just a really bad call for a guy who's already got that kind of reputation as a filmmaker. To show something like this, a Superman who's like essentially being nonchalant about the fucking end of the world in the background.
I think there might be a little of that in there.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, come on, Kryptonian sperm laser. I don't know what it is. It's just
again, he had to understand that everybody was going to look at this image, and as your first impression with no other information, you know, people are going to wonder, and they're going to read into it, and they're going to speculate, and it's as they would, you know, like, is there something to be said about what kind of Superman he's going to be because of the way that he's sitting and seemingly casual about a giant laser firing off in the background? You know,
that was my read about it. Without knowing the background for it, that was my assumption. It's like, surely you would want as your first publicly released image from like the set of your brand new Superman film, on which basically the entire fate of your project depends. You want it to be as unambiguous as possible in terms of like, this is the type of character you're going to get. And Gunn, I'm sure, is aware, because, you know, he engages enough with fans on social media and things to know that people are very, very tired of, you know, tearing down superheroes, especially like the stronger male superheroes, tired of the darker and the grittier stuff. Superman in particular, you know, usually used to at least stand for, you know, upright, strong, value oriented, you know, an actual icon of someone that you would, you know, the most morally perfect person you would aspire to be. And releasing a photo like this, which is so ambiguous, just allows people to fulfill all of their worst possible ideas as to what this characterization of Superman is going to be like. On the plus side, I mean, that obviously is not the intent, so maybe the film will still be good. It's just that it's bad PR to not understand that, I think.
Yeah, shouldn't he have planted his flag with like a Superman that's bright, hopeful, you know, clean costume, standing up in the world, and like, I'm here, truth, justice, American way.
You think so? Especially since I think that's what he wants to do, right? Is like
that's what I thought he wanted to. Man. Yeah, wasn't that what he wants to do, Fringy? Is like, isn't that what Legacy is supposed to be about?
I thought so.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it. I mean, I really thought he was going to go back a little bit more of that Christopher Reeve, you know, bright colors. Again, truth, justice, the American way. Let's go.
Yeah, and this image just doesn't give you that sense, which again, for your first look at, and not, it's like you said, it's not only for Superman, it's for this new DC universe. It all relies on this. Like, I think this film it can't just be good. It has to be great in order to overcome essentially all of the baggage that it's going to be weighed down with for the last, you know, decade of DC films. There's a lot riding on it.
Well, it has to contrast, especially with Snyder. If we're going back to dark, then what was the point?
Yeah, exactly. You gotta try and like present it as much of a new direction that you're taking these films in as much as possible. Because I mean, I imagine that, you know, even though it's like a 2-year gap between the end of the DCEU and this one, it's not long, and it's not even 2 years really. It's a year and a half. It's not long, and people are probably still going to be thinking like, "Remember the Flash? Remember that terrible movie?"
Well, that's the problem. Like when you say like, "Oh, remember the Flash? Remember Black Adam? Like remember Blue Beetle?" No one does.
That's true. That is true.
But no, I get the other point that you're making though about like. With Superman, this is the time when this is the time when people are just sick of subversion of the genre. I think they're sick of like, oh, this is a quirky new take on the character, and like, you know, he's different because he doesn't want to be a hero and he's sarcastic or whatever, lazy. That we have now progressed and come full circle to the point where no, if you're going to make this work in any capacity, you're probably just going to have to tell a straight up heroic story of Superman actually being a hero and being a good guy character. That's the only way you're going to make this work.
Overtly as well, right? Because I always go back when talking like this conversation, always reminds me of it's seen in Avengers, the first one, where Coulson's showing Cap his suit, and he says, "Isn't this a bit old fashioned?" And Coulson says, "I think with what it's about to come to light, I think people need a little bit of the old fashioned right about now." And that film didn't shy away from the idea that Captain America represents old-fashioned values which are good. It was quite honest about that, and consequently that character is quite well loved, and and the modern iteration is not, obviously, for very different reasons. But like, you don't have to be very coy about what you're doing with Superman, and I think it would go a long way to encourage fans who might be skeptical about this new film to say, no, this is what Superman will stand for, and then to show him standing for that in your first publicity photo, rather than sitting there pulling his boots on like he doesn't give a shit.
Right. He needed to plant it. He needed to nail this fiction. Everybody's been waiting.
Yep. But yeah, I as I say, the fact that people have jumped on this so readily just kind of, it suggests to me that people are primed to hate this film.
Yeah.
And that's not a good market that you want to be going into.
No, because you're already in the negative. I mean, it looked more like it would be a photo for a Batman.
Yeah. I was
So, has there been
curious as
anything
well.
out, like recently that's sort of come along with that negative audience expectation, which has exceeded it and earned plaudits for, you know, beating out the low expectation. I'm trying to think if there's anything recently that's done that.
Prey probably did it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's like, we're talking like a good few years ago now. But yeah, I think people
Tokyo
expected that to be a bit shit, and they ended up being fairly successful and quite well received.
Like House of the Dragon maybe is one that's coming to mind, isn't it?
Yeah.
After the way that
Yeah.
Game of Thrones
Maybe
8
Top
hours
Gun
and then-
Maverick too,
Top Gun.
in
Man.
terms
Oh.
of having, you know,
Nobody expected it to do that well. You know,
Yeah.
nobody expected that it was going to make well over $1 billion.
I'm struggling to remember with House of the Dragon. Were the trailers well received?
I don't think. I think people were on edge.
I think the
Inoffensive.
metric that's worthwhile to think about is that the ratings kept going up for that show. Like, the longer that the season went on, more and more people were starting to pay attention.
Because I think, if anything, people were just haunted by the memory of like the last seasons of Game of Thrones, and so it started from a negative place, I suppose, in terms of fan, you know.
And there's that
attitude towards it.
perception, right, of like a spin-off of the Nightmare Show. Why would I even give a single shit about that? That it's like, well, because it's good. It was the simple response to a lot of these sort of situations. And yes, a miracle. And if they pull off a season 2 that is at least as quality as season 1, it's going to be really curious if they can build themselves all the way back up. I don't think they'll reach Game of Thrones levels, but it's fascinating to see them claw their way back from the grave.
I'm almost kind of annoyed though that it's so good because it's George, and like it's another excuse for him to not write his fucking books, and I'm like, I just almost feel like he's getting rewarded for being a lazy asshole who gets easily distracted.
Once he got all those celebrities around him, I think that was pretty much it. He's like, I'm having too much fun. I don't want to go back to the desk. It's not a movie, but I will say this. I was completely wrong on that. You know, that X-Men 97 animated series? I crapped on that. And I've apologized for it before it came out because of what Bo DeMaio was saying. And it surprised the hell out of me.
I've not heard much about it, to be honest, since
It's
it came
really
out.
A lot of good things.
It's a lot of fun. Although the breakneck pace.
Mhm.
I mean, they're touching on these their own spin on it, but these very classic X-Men comic tales, and they're doing what you know, you might have had 2 years in a comic book. They're doing it in 30 minutes,
Right.
but for the most part, it's pretty epic as far as it goes.
Yeah, I have apologized for this twice because when DeMaio gave that interview and he's like, the first thing that I told Feige, you know, to get on board is like, you know, my ideas. And he went to this whole thing. I'm like, oh, it's going to be a woke mess. And then it came out. I let 4 or 5 episodes come out. I streamed them all together. I'm like, this is phenomenal. And they fired that guy.
He did have an
OnlyFans account.
Yes, he did.
The only thing I remember is everyone being mad that they nuked Rogue's ass.
They did.
And but that could just be down to like a bad shot or like a single freeze frame that they decided to take, like the most unflattering.
Drinker's like, I gotta go analyze her ass at every scene.
Yeah,
make sure.
it's an unfortunate job, but someone has to do it more.
But it's phenomenal. The Magneto, everyone in there. It's brilliant. Again, it's not a film, but it's very, very well done.
Yeah, and they certainly haven't held back on Magneto either.
Oh no.
I was very surprised.
Well, that's what you want, really.
Yeah.
In terms of things that haven't been well received, we've got the first full trailer for The Acolyte that just came out a few days ago.
Ooh,
so, for context, it's currently got, what do we have here? 5.8 million views, the 68,000 upvotes, and 135,000 downvotes
Man,
Wow.
on YouTube. That is a
Ooh,
horrendous
they gotta be
ratio.
scared, don't they? They gotta be
Yeah.
real scared about the
Well,
future
come
of
on.
Star Wars, huh?
They couldn't have known that this was going to. They couldn't have expected that this was going to be well received, considering the horrendous track record that they've had with Disney Plus Star Wars shows. The producer of this show, sorry, the showrunner, Leslie Headland, not a particularly popular figure amongst the fan base, and everything that they've told us about what this show is going to be and what it represents, not exactly endearing it to people. I will say, like, having watched this trailer, they have gone all out with the production on this. Just like the action sequences and stuff, they've done everything they can to make it look as cool as possible. I don't think it's
And
going to
yet-
help necessarily.
And yet it doesn't look cool at all. It looks
No.
lame.
No,
It
but
looks
like
so lame.
I guess what I'm saying is, like, compared to something like Obi-Wan Kenobi that looked like it was done on a soundstage with a budget of $500, this looks like it's had a lot of money spent on it, just probably not in a wise way.
I just think they should have renamed it. It should have been like The Rise of the TikTok Jedi. I mean, it just there's something
Sorry.
about it I just don't like.
I'm gonna mute it because they usually hit you for copyright if you use the music. But I'm just trying to call up a sequence that kind of demonstrates it. Bear with me a second.
From the truth.
Yeah.
The truth. I think Star Wars can only make money now unless they get rid of the management in porn. That there's nothing left for them to do.
Yeah, like the visuals look okay. Like I say, I can tell that they spent quite a bit of money on this one.
Well, the thing is an impression that I got, I don't know what it was. There's like, it's so hard to pin down, but there's just like a way that the Disney Star Wars shows look, with the exception of Andor, that just comes across as like, man, none of this feels real in like a very strange sense. I don't feel like I'm in real places or real worlds. It feels like it's characters, actors walking around on set performing a bad script. I don't know what it is. It's like very hard for me to look at these things and like get absorbed as though this is a real place with real people living their lives.
I think the no sense of place is a really important one there, because I remember that the first look we had at the Acolyte as well, which is like it's supposed to be set back, way before even the prequels, and then you look at all of the background characters, you look at the costume design, and there's nothing that really gives you any sense of history about them. Like it very much is, this is the set we're on, and so this is the drawer of costumes we have to use. They're not particularly worn or weathered. They don't particularly speak to the type of place they seem to be living in. Whereas, if there's one thing to be said for pretty much all of original Star Wars and even the prequels, everywhere you go and every person who is there is immediately recognizable as going sort of, well, with the maybe exception of the Gungans, but, parking them. Everyone else clearly belongs where they are, and everything feels like it's been there for a long time. Whereas with stuff like this, I always just get the sense, it sprung to life 5 minutes ago because the camera arrived.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm trying to capture this, like, because the fucking that looks bad.
That's her wife, isn't it? Is that the wife of Leslie Headland's wife?
I don't know.
Is it?
I think so. Yeah,
Not
because
sure.
her wife is his wife. Sorry, her wife is in one of these, is playing one of the roles, one of the main roles.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I just
It's
wish
probably-
that, like you just pointed out, why is it that Star Wars fashions don't change?
Yeah.
Like there's no, you don't have an idea, like why are the Jedi, it's always been strange to me that all the Jedi are dressed like Ben Kenobi was in Star Wars, because
I mean, the Jedi,
whatever
I
happened, what
can
happened to
get behind
Luke's
the
badass,
Jedi.
but what his black outfit, when Luke has the black outfit he had in Jedi, it's like Ben Kenobi was dressed that way because he lives in the desert.
I mean,
Well,
the Jedi I can get behind because they're like warrior monks, so I can imagine that they've got just basic functional robes that aren't about fashion and they're not like flamboyant or anything. So that's okay. Luke, like in the original trilogy, like Luke wasn't an official Jedi. He was very much a guy who was aspiring to become a Jedi. So like he wore clothes based on, his circumstances. So again, I think that works okay. But yeah, like with shows like this, like TV shows like this are a chance for you to show the cultures of different places,
Yes.
get a feel for like how things are done, how people dress and stuff. And it's it follows that same Jedi aesthetic where everyone just wears like bland, colorless robes, like just the most functional, basic things that the wardrobe department could get their hands on.
But
There's no
wouldn't
sense
they?
of being somewhere.
But Drinker, wouldn't they do that though? Because you just said the warrior monks. Wouldn't they be the same?
No, that's what I mean. No, but I'm not just talking about Jedi. I just mean just general characters. Like none of them have a fashion. There's not a sense of like particular style for each planet or whatever. There's no sense that these are unique cultures. They're just this weird homogeny of really nothingness. I think Andor is probably the only one that touched upon things like that, where like they're context specific clothes.
Well, yeah, Andor very much creates a sense of place with all of the planets that you go to, like to the in the sense that you could speak to a distinctive culture and a way of life and a sense of how does a regular person exist in this particular world. Whereas in this case here, I don't know what it is. It's like it's so weird to see so much money leveraged in service of something that comes across as so soulless. It's so weird how this much money can be put into something that. I don't get it. Like, how does so much money get poured into a project that already before it's out, it just seems like it's a foregone conclusion that it's going to be bad, it's going to fail, and nobody's going to care about it or remember it. Like, that it only exists to be like, well, hopefully people stay subscribed to Disney Plus for the next 2 months, you know?
Pretty
like,
much.
that's kind of the only purpose it serves.
But I think that's one of the problems.
Even like Andor is a really good example, I think, of the folly of even trying this as a strategy. Because even if you do turn around something which is actually really good, as Andor is, it on its own is not going to rekindle the kind of love that you need to make this Disney Plus Star Wars universe actually profitable anyway. The only way you can do that is by doing a good feature film. The Mandalorian Season 3 has the budget of a big budget by a feature film standard, and yet it all goes on, Mando Season 3 or the Book of Boba Fett. And the stupid scooters talking about people not, wearing or driving things that belong in any kind of place. Even if this turns out to be really good, and I doubt that it will, but maybe it will. Let's say this turns out to surprise us, and it's actually really well written. It's still not going to do much because it's the kind of thing you profit on the film universe from. You can't really generate too much interest in your Disney Plus shows, I don't think.
Well, because you have to think about it, Platoon. All of their Disney Plus Star Wars shows, from The Mandalorian except for the Acolyte, up until now, where you have Obi-Wan, where you have the Book of Boba Fett, and Andor, have cost $1.8 billion to produce. 1.8 billion, all of those shows together.
Well, I saw a great breakdown of the box office revenue generated by all of Star Wars since Disney acquired them, and apparently Lucasfilm have still not actually made back their purchase price.
No, they haven't. Yeah, they haven't.
Especially with
Disney,
all the costs.
Disney haven't made a penny off of them, which I think is amazing.
Yeah, but they tried to tell all their shareholders, I think it was in the last quarterly meeting, they tried to tell them all, when you had the Peltz who was fighting Iger and wanted to replace the two members on the board, they were trying to say, hey, look, we made money. But when you read the fine print in the shareholder agreement, it's like, well, these are based on 10-year projections going forward. And
there was also a thing where they didn't include the cost price of purchasing Lucasfilm to begin with in their financial accounts. It's like, well, so no, you can't tell me it's made money if you didn't tell me how much it cost. That's just
it's like a business just taking their gross profit and being like, so that's how much we made this year. It's like, yeah, but how much did you spend to make that money? That's not important.
That age-old point that comes back again and again and again. It's like they did make money somewhat, and you're like, no, you don't understand. Any money they did make was a fraction of the universe where they treated Star Wars even with a remote ounce of respect. The amount of money they could have made would have been incredible. And what they've done, you need someone to do that on a fucking board meeting to be like, do you know what they've done? Do you understand? And then they go, well, that guy said we made a bunch of money. It's like, no.
Imagine if The Last Jedi had made twice as much money as The Force Awakens, as opposed to less money than The Force Awakens, and then The Rise of Skywalker had made twice as much again, as opposed to about half as much. And it's just it's because you're disrespecting the franchise. You're not telling stories people want to see. You're destroying characters people really love. And even that's another of the bad signs, I think, for the Acolyte is that, I think one of the lines from the previous trailer or the first look thing was it's not about good and evil, it's about power and who has the right to use it, or something like that, I think, which is another it's another of those we're doing the morally gray political intrigue thing that everybody remembers. That's definitely Star Wars, as opposed to rekindling people's love and admiration for, I don't know, the Jedi, or exploring a part of the galaxy where there are no Jedi. I don't think people are really necessarily crying out for another sort of cynical political machinations of moral gray areas. I think we've had a lot of that.
Too much of it. I mean, I think how Robert was saying earlier, how a lot of these writers and teams are repeating like what they saw from Buffy and Angel. I think a lot also are stuck in the era of The Dark Knight Returns from Frank Miller. Like, I thought that was great when it came out, a seminal work. But then everybody has wanted to go this dark, morally gray, or do whatever it takes. There's no right, there's no wrong. It's just reach the goal. I don't know. I think we need events back. Maybe if Disney stopped making a Star Wars show releasing a couple, 2 or 3 a year, and then start focusing on
good sense, right? I mean, because the other, I keep saying the other as though there aren't about a billion reasons to be concerned about the Acolyte. Another of the ways in which this could go very terribly wrong is that if you start introducing, you don't even have to call them the Sith, but you reintroduce the Sith into the galaxy at the point before the prequels, it's going to be very difficult to come out at the end of this show without having made the Jedi in the prequels seem way more incompetent than they already did, which was already significantly, because they've missed a bunch of incredibly obvious clues that they should have picked up on, which would have forearmed them against Palpatine's plan to begin with. So, like, that's the risk with prequels, is always that you do damage to the things that are canonically set after them. And I have a feeling this will do something like that.
Well, we'll look at what it made. Didn't last weekend Phantom Menace come in at 8.5 or like $9 million? It came in second place either way after 25 years. So there's still love for the films. It's just
I love this. I can't get over this guy's helmet that he's wearing here. This really leapt out at me in the trailer as well. It's like Venom has morphed into the Star Wars universe.
Lizard Kylo.
Yeah.
Looks like the guy from Ahsoka.
What's going to look scary? Let's paint his helmet red and put some teeth on it. Like, yeah, sure. Okay, that'll do.
Also, are his eyes on his chin or something? Because I can't see any eye slits there. That's just a mouth slit, isn't it?
No, there are. There's two slits.
A little slit there for his eyes. But
looks like the man in the Iron Mask. Yeah,
it's sad how much this still functions. Like, people went nuts over him. It's like, oh my god, and all the lightsabers. People go nuts over just seeing lightsabers. I don't know.
Look at them there. Look, lightsabers doing their thing.
Do you guys all remember the what was the name of that thing in you remember the guy who in Ahsoka who when he got chopped he puffed like all that green smoke? Yeah, the fart guy. He was the same deal where it's like, oh, you look like Dark Souls but Star Wars, and then you're just a fart clown, and that's
there are all these theories about who he might be. Is it Bendak Starkiller, the guy? Is it going to be Maul? Is it Ezra? It's like, no, he's just green gas. And then you read the interviews, and the director's like, even I don't know what it was. They didn't tell me.
Is there a better example of a more overt slap to the audience's face, and they're just like, oh, well, next one. You know, like, next mystery, let's go. That one was nothing. Like the last 10. it's fine. Let's go again.
I can't wait for a bunch of characters to get stabbed by these lightsabers and be totally fine afterwards.
Win this 100 years before, so maybe the lightsabers will actually do something.
What sad reality about Marok, whatever the fuck his name was, it had turned out to have been Ezra, to have been fucking Starkiller if it had been that. Whatever it turned out to be, if it were an actual character rather than a fart cloud, like, it probably would have been worse. And it's annoying we can't get to a point where people understand that. Like, Star Wars is possibly the number one for a series that just jangles those fucking keys. Because, it goes beyond characters, right? Lightsabers are jangling keys.
Yeah.
But what I find sad about all this is that, it's Star Wars is so far up its own ass. I mean, the story they seem to be telling here is the only story Star Wars is now telling, which is the Sith versus the Jedi, the dark side versus the light side. And when you think about the original Star Wars, that was an adjunct to the story that was being told. You at the time you had the Empire and the Rebellion, and with this, somebody said to me that they would like to see like Hamlet set in the Star Wars universe, and you'd have Force ghosts, and I'm like, you know what, that would have more resonance today than anything they're doing, because Lucas was looking at, whether he was looking at Kurosawa movies, whether he was looking at the Dam Busters, which was about a very specific incident in World War II that he was inspired by on the attack on the Death Star. Star Wars is only about itself. It doesn't have any larger meaning beyond, and everyone is like you said, key jangling. Okay, but what is any of this? What is the story? How does the story being told resonate with audiences. Now, the original Star Wars, of course, I keep saying this, but Han and Luke are blue-collar guys. One's a truck driver, one's a farmer. They're not necessarily particularly extraordinary, and they get caught up in extraordinary events, and Luke represented all of us. All of us were Luke Skywalker watching those twin setting suns on Tatooine to the strains of a French horn and John Williams score. We'd all been there. And what Star Wars was saying, that sometimes ordinary people can be extraordinary, and get caught up in adventures. There was no midi-chlorians. There was no Jedi Knights. It was a farm boy who wanted to get the hell out of that horrible what is worse than moisture farming on a desert planet? Nothing. If there's a bright center of the universe, you're on the planet that it's furthest from. Now, what does Star Wars? I don't relate to any of these characters. They have nothing to say to me. But when I was a 10-year-old watching Luke for the first time, I'm like, I would like to see adventure find me. And could I step up? Could I step up and do what Luke did? I want to go to Mos Eisley, and I want to go to Alderaan and become a Jedi like my father. Where is that?
Like, I contrast that with like Ahsoka, where I've never seen someone be on an adventure and look so fucking bored and miserable about it.
It's unbelievable. And that was part of the appeal of Star Wars. Whether you identified as Han, whether you identified as Luke, these were ordinary people. And now Star Wars is only about royalty or, the Jedi. And that's not how Star Wars began. And it's so strange to me that that's what we're watching now. I don't relate to a Jedi Knight. Luke becomes a Jedi Knight. Luke became something. Star Wars was about following a path. Everybody, whatever path you want to follow, Luke followed a path and achieved something, whether it was the liberation of the galaxy or a personal transformation. He achieved something. What are these people? They're not on any path. It's all just, let's fight the Sith. I want the Sith to win.
It's interesting about the idea of like how what do the stories mean? What is like the earnest desire to like express a story that can be meaningful to people and helpful to people in real life? Yeah. It's like Star Wars has flanderized itself to the point that in the minds of Disney, the only thing that Star Wars can be is lightsabers and action scenes and Tatooine, to the point that it's like become inconceivable that you could have a Star Wars story that might be like low stakes. Why wasn't Obi-Wan Kenobi, instead of him going on a galaxy-trotting adventure, getting into lightsaber fights with Darth Vader, why couldn't it just be an introspective, small-scale, low-stakes story about him like going on some sort of spiritual journey or something like that? Why can't we have a story about, I don't know, like a decommissioned battle droid trying to figure out what the meaning of his life is going to be as he maneuvers through a galaxy that doesn't make sense to him anymore?
That would be interesting. I'd watch that. I don't know,
just small ideas, like small ideas that are trying to like explore an actual theme that might be useful and meaningful to people.
They had it with Finn in the beginning, remember? And then they totally killed that. I mean, that was an interesting storyline.
When you say beginning, you literally mean his first like 5 minutes.
I mean, the 5 minutes. Exactly. I mean, that was an interesting take. The stormtrooper leaves. I was like, I want to know that. And then that just disappeared.
I think it's what people thought they were getting with The Mandalorian as well, which is, finally this is actually a story that isn't about the Jedi, and it's not about this sort of very, very austere and stoic class of warrior priests who are unrelatable. It's a simple guy trying to make his way in the universe. I kind of want to see what missions he goes on, and then he doesn't. And now we have Mando. But like, I think it's what people thought.
You've essentially just got a lightsaber surrogate in the dark saber. Like you've got the big epic struggle against the resurgent empire. It's just the same crap.
Well, that's the
they had the Terminator franchise, where essentially they're just doing the same exact storyline again and again because they can't think of anything different to do with it.
On the note of the flanderizations, when I really do hate that's happened with Star Wars is the way they've done intrigue in almost every single story, which is the most hollow version you could imagine. Right, like going back to the OT, the intrigue behind the relationship of the characters has been so like caricatured at this point. Like every single fucking thing to do with Star Wars that comes out, it's like, wait a minute, what's this item? What's this person? Where do they connect to all of this? And by the time we get to the end of the story, the writer's like, we didn't know. We just thought we would ask. Like, that's all we've got, really. Well, maybe next season, next movie, we'll figure this out. And then by the time they get to the end of the story, they have to answer the question. We saw this in the sequel trilogy, which, holy shit, right? Like getting all the answers of that trilogy was one of the most like embarrassing things, and that was just indicative of what was to come. Which the answers behind everything that's been set up in Ahsoka. It's like, are you not excited to see what Thrawn's plan will be? It's like, no.
Why
And I
would
like
be
Skarsgård.
excited about this plan?
Right. It's just, but then you end up with Jack Black and Lizzo. I mean, that kind of like, I mean, when you end up with Lizzo in a Star Wars next to Jack Black, you're like, okay, this is official now. This is Kathleen Kennedy telling us all to go fuck ourselves.
Suddenly, the holiday special's looking a little bit better.
Yeah, it does.
When you see stuff like that.
Something that I think has definitely happened with Star Wars is it ceased to be a special occurrence. You know, Star Wars used to be special. New Star Wars.
Oh, yeah.
Wow, that matters. You know, that actually matters. Like, that's meaningful. That don't come around that often. Now we're at a place where it's like, yeah, you should expect a lot of Star Wars stuff every single year, and it's going to be forgettable, aside from being terrible. For the most, no, I don't even know. I was about to say for the most part, as though Andor comprises a significant portion of what exists in Disney Star Wars.
Like one tiny corner of that universe now.
Exactly.
But they were events. They were events.
I think it was Gary summed it up best, where he said like Star Wars went from a pop culture phenomenon to a bunch of pretty crappy TV shows on an obscure portion of a streaming service.
Which
That's
is
all
now,
it is now.
which is now competing with Tubi. You know that last week there was a report that came out. Disney is actually having difficulty competing with Tubi, a free streaming service.
I quite liked Gary described it recently. Oh, I think he had before, but it's just something that stuck with me the last time he said it was that it's been turned into a streaming service genre, as in you cycle through genres like horror, comedies, like Star Wars genre. We got all this stuff. You can't tell the difference between any of it. Some of it's animated, some of it's apparently mature, some of it's not, some of it's old, some of it's new, and you're just like, sure, Star Wars. It's just McDonald's, but as a film franchise.
Oh.
And the thing is, as well, they've produced so much content in the time that they've had this franchise that now they've tipped the scales in favor of shit.
Yeah.
So that, like, now if I had to try and balance it out, like, well, what's the good aspects of Star Wars? It's like, well, we've got the OT, and Rogue One was fine, I guess. And probably the Revenge of the Sith was fine, and Andor. And then you've got this mountain of shit on the other side, which just unbalances it.
Well,
to the point where it's like,
interestingly
well, I have to conclude now, it's probably there's a lot more crap stuff in Star Wars than there is good stuff.
And across the board, you know, in video, you know, films, TV shows, and video games, it's like, oh, damn, that scale is sliding in one direction. And it's not going to improve, probably, like Star Wars Outlaws. I mean, shit. We'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see.
But here's something. When we were younger, I'm thinking most of y'all felt the same way. Didn't you imagine one day that if we could ever have, like you dreamed, wouldn't it be great if we understood this person's journey more? I would love to see a film about this. I'd love to know more about Han or more about Chewie. But they didn't tap into any of that. They didn't do it properly. You know what I'm saying?
And they gave us Han showering with Chewie, and then he got his name because he didn't have any friends. And it's just like, I did kind of want to see where you came from, and now I really wish I hadn't. Like, that's just a boring story.
Right. I'm wondering if we were right, though. I'm wondering if we were right in the fact or we were wrong, because we all wanted to know more, just like when you pick up the book.
Well, as a kid, you know, and someone who gets into a franchise like this, you instinctively always want to know more. And it's only as you get older that you realize, no, sometimes the questions and the mystique is more interesting than the actual answers that you could get. And maybe, you know, if they had decided to do things like Solo back in the 80s when the actors could still be used and George Lucas was still in charge of it, they might have made something kind of interesting. Now you just pray that they don't do stuff. You're more relieved by things that they decide to leave alone at this point, because the answers are definitely not going to be as satisfying as the questions.
No, I mean, I never wanted to see Michael Corleone's time in World War II because I love The Godfather.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, he's a war hero. What did he do? Michael Corleone's time during, the Battle of the Bulge. And it doesn't matter. I mean,
you didn't think of that as Star Wars, to know more about Luke after Return of the Jedi? Because I know I did. I know.
But the thing is, I read, and when they brought back Star Wars and they released the Thrawn trilogy of books and the Dark Empire comics, those are really cool. You know, I'm like that. And in my head canon, that's what went on. You know, and the whole Lucas, that whole literary empire that existed until until they decanonized it all. I mean, the Saj Ventress, Jason, the Solo twins, and all that. It was all cool because it was all written by people that, not all of it was great. But yeah, they liked all that stuff. And it was the problem that I have with all this stuff is, okay, they've taken the Thrawn trilogy that came out in 91 and the Dark Empire comics that also came out in 91. And they liked those enough that they're now taking those characters and bringing them into actual canonical Star Wars. And yet they're not doing it as well as the original creators who wrote those comics and wrote those books. Like Timothy Zahn, who created the character of Grand Admiral Thrawn, had to be told that they were going to use Thrawn after it was already done. And I'm like,
look what we got in terms of Thrawn in Ahsoka.
It's mind blowing to me that here you have these things, and the same thing is happening with Star Trek, and they've got these stories, but because they're secondary, they're comics, I don't get it. I don't get why they'll adapt literary properties and go, hey, we're going to adapt this book and we're going to make it in. Why don't they think for IPs that they'll also adapt previously existing stories? Now they're piecemealing it all out. They've delved in. Dave Filoni is grabbing stuff from all over the extended universe that was decanonized and they're bringing it back. And it's really weird that they are doing that. Like, we didn't create Grand Admiral Thrawn. Someone else did, but we own the book. So we're going to go take what that author did, who never thought his work was going to be adapted. And if it was, he was going to get paid or whatever. Because when he wrote a novel and signed a contract, he didn't think his work was going to be used on TV or in the movies.
Yeah,
but now it is.
We're going to give you the Wish.com version of what he wrote. But I do like this one as well from Casey Boy. He says, watch Volume 1 of Visions, independent short stories, no legacy characters or politics. And since Volume 1 is made by Japanese animation studios, the lore is actually respected. Yet it seems to be the one thing in modern Star Wars that most critics haven't watched.
I've seen it.
Is it any good? Is it worth it?
Some of it is decent. Well, some of it for me is decent. I don't like all of it. I watched it right after watching Tales of the Empire because I needed a palate cleanser because that was just wretched after last weekend. But I enjoyed some of it.
Heard mixed things on Visions. Lots of people said it was great. Lots of people said it was terrible. Lots of people said it was okay.
I have a couple that I like and a couple that I'm like, no, not really.
Like
but after Tales of Empire, with the they-them thing in Tales of Empire, I was like, okay. And the bad story, I was like, I'm going to go watch Visions.
Should we round out our little open bar this evening with a few super chats?
Yeah.
Because we have many waiting our attention. Just give me 1 second while I answer this. All right, hold on.
Did anyone ever think, though, that Star Wars, such a historic franchise, would die?
No,
I just couldn't imagine it.
It takes a lot to kill it, but they managed it.
I mean, the true test of all that will be releasing the next movie and how it does in the box office.
But how do you think it would? How do you think it would do, MauLer? Really?
I kind of have no fucking clue, to be honest with you. If they release a Rey movie, I do not know what we should expect from that. I don't know.
I think I can tell you what to expect.
Because remember what Hedlund and Kennedy said. Well, we looked at the top characters that could help rejuvenate this franchise, and they said Grogu, Rey, R2, and Chewie. I was like, what? Somehow Chewie. I was like, what? They're like, there's a mix of these. Like, okay.
I think
he's the only one we haven't killed yet, so we might as well give it a go.
Well, we killed him once and then brought him back, so there was that. But yeah, I think a Rey movie would do solo numbers at this point. That's how badly the franchise has fallen.
I think that's a fair guess.
But anyway, in terms of the super chats here, the first one is from Metal Face Rosie, who says, Drinker, we may need a What is Woke Part 2. I think some people in the comment sections didn't get it the first time. I mean, what can I do? Like, it's like say the same thing again. I thought I expressed myself as clearly as I could with the first video. Canada Plus says, Hail panel, why has every video game this year been bad or pulled a dumb move, i.e., Helldivers with a PSN account or Stellar Blade getting censored? Well, I mean, Helldivers has redeemed itself, and with Stellar Blade, the censorship is like, okay, I only get like 95% tit now instead of 100, so it's still pretty.
The 100% tit skin hasn't been changed, so you still got that.
That's true, yeah. And I will say,
as for Helldivers, though, I do want to mention, like, as far as I'm aware, whenever it gets brought up, I've seen people say, like, don't forget, they still haven't fixed the nature of people in several countries not having any access to the servers still through the PSN stuff. I don't know if that's fixed yet, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. And I will say Final Fantasy VII Rebirth gets top marks from me. I think that's a game that's done really well, and it deserves to. So I don't think they fucked that one up. Mr. Luca says Phantom Menace was really fun and goofy. It was definitely one of those things. TGV Monster says, hi, Drinker and MauLer at Platoon. What are you expecting with Resident Evil 9? I've got no clue what they will do after Village at this point. It was so out there and successful. Are they going to make sequels like that? So, Village is like Resident Evil 5 to Resident Evil 4. You know,
Wait,
like...
Villages to what?
So Village is to Resident Evil 7 what Resident Evil 5 was to 4, if you know what I mean.
Bloody
so it
hell.
takes, yeah, so it takes the things that worked and then amps them up to 11 and kind of not ruins them, but undermines the value of them in the process. You know, so I could get behind the kind of isolated horror, the sort of Texas Chainsaw Massacre style of Resident Evil 7. It worked really well. Very effective as a horror setting. They then took that to the next level with like the gothic horror of Village, where you're in an isolated location. It's first person. The pace is theoretically slower, like 7, but it kind of isn't. And it loses so much of the horror aspect that made 7 so effective. And I think that's what Resident Evil 5 did with 4. It took those same ideas of like over the shoulder, third-person shooter style against like a high number of enemies, intense action sequences, and just amped that up to 11 and kind of lost the sense of balance in the process.
Do you know? Have you seen? I've made videos about Resident Evil 7 because it would have been before I'd met you, so I don't know if you've ever watched them. Drinker.
I can't remember if I've seen it. I think I've seen some of them.
Because
they were a series, weren't they?
Yeah. I thought 7 was pretty crap. And I played it. I quite enjoyed. Like the reason I was so invested in playing it was the demo caught me quite a bit, and then the game itself, I thought that everything in the house was like really solid, but then
I think
like it drops off. Like they didn't.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess what I'm saying though is like in terms of the general setting, the premise, and the sort of tone that it goes for, I think it's a lot more effective than say Resident Evil 6 would be. You know, it took the series in a different direction, away from like the really intense action and essentially just feeling like you were playing Gears of War, but with zombies, to something a bit more stripped back with 7. But then you start to build it back up again and introduce more action-y elements with 8. So I worry that they're just gonna take that to an even more extreme level with 9.
I just don't even know if they want it. Like, I'm assuming, is Ethan Winters like out of the story now or not?
Fuck, I hope so.
What a lame
like he was literally just fungus in A and then just melted. So I can't imagine how he's going to come back.
It's Resident Evil, so I guess it's up to them if they want to bring it back. But
I mean, no one's truly gone. But like, I'm not in love with the time jump that they did, where it's like, okay, we're jumping forward by 15 years. Why? I don't want to see the original characters all old now.
Well,
so
yeah, I mean, you know, I'm actually really curious where Resident Evil's going next as a gaming franchise, because we're reaching what feels like 2 roadblocks, being the RE5 remake and a sequel to RE Village, which I don't even know what that looks like. You know what I mean? Like both of those, I don't know what those projects look like if they're even happening.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly wouldn't be surprised if they put more energy and time into just remakes, because there's a fucking huge back catalog of games that they could remake at this point.
As soon as they remake them all, they should just do it again. Like, it's just a new.
Don't
remake.
make anything new. Just keep updating it. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you know, RE4 was a lot of fun, like the remake. Sorry, RE2 was a lot of fun as a remake. I'm sure RE5 will be as well. RE3 was a bit stupid, but
It'd be so fucking cool if they remade RE5 and they didn't change anything to avoid upsetting anyone. They kept it all. That'd be so fucking cool.
They're going to have to, because there'll be an uproar from the fans if they change that stuff.
Did you see, like, I think it was a Jacksepticeye clip went viral talking about, he was like, they can't remake 5 because it's like offensively racist. It's just like, oh, not you two. Like, stop saying this shit.
I honestly would like to see a remake of Code Veronica, because I feel like that game is the most ripe for like fixing, because that game had so many fucking issues. And I think now if you were to do that with the remake graphics and try and streamline some of the really shitty puzzle aspects and the boss battles that were really unfair, you could probably have a lot of fun with that game.
Yeah.
Because that was a bit of a weird one in Resident Evil history. What's the next one? Sorry, I'm just trying to bring it down here. Gator159 says, link the source where you get these thumbnails, please. It's just internet, really. Like, there's not really a specific source for it. Metal Face Rosie says, Fringy, watch the Larry Sanders show. That's an order, apparently.
Actually,
I don't know what that is.
The Larry Sanders show?
Larry Sanders show?
Oh, God, yeah. Long time ago.
Larry Sanders was the co-creator. He worked with Seinfeld to create the Seinfeld show. And Larry Sanders has been on HBO for, 12 seasons?
Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Yeah, finished.
Just finished. It's actually pretty funny.
It's like Seinfeld. If you like Seinfeld.
Yeah, okay. I might check it out.
Taker610 says, Superman is thinking, everyone just go away now. Yeah, I mean, that's the vibe I get from him. Michael Brockie says, listening to these streams has helped me perfect different accents. The ladies love the Platoon voice. Cheers to everyone at the bar. GM from AU.
Yes, they do.
TGV Monster says, I heard they're making a Gollum movie. MauLer's PTSD triggers. I also saw that Suicide Squad lost $200 million. You get what you deserve.
My PTSD is triggered because it reminds me we never got Lord of Ring Gollum 2. That got scrapped. So,
do you think the guys at that development studio, or the defunct development studio, are like, oh my God, guys, this is our time. We can somehow tie into this movie.
He knew they respected us.
Yay.
Who is their Lois? Has anybody seen their Lois for the new soup?
Yeah, it's Marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
Oh.
It's Rachel Brosnahan.
Okay.
Yeah.
She's relatively old for that role. She's
in her 30s, I think.
Okay, that's not too bad.
She'll definitely give that 30, that sort of that she's 33 years old.
Margot Kidder.
Oh wow.
Yeah, give it back. I mean, she's got that pitter patter, that sort of what you'd see in the 30s from a movie in the 30s, 40s, 50s kind of a thing.
Right.
So
RRTNZ says, any chance of a drinker recommends for something funny like Father Ted or Dodgeball? When Chuck Norris plays Dodgeball, the balls dodge him. Cheers. I'm for sure. I mean, I think with funny movies like that, it's almost better to cover them as like a happy hour or something where we can just have a bit of banter about it and talk about the funny moments, because it's tough to review things like that and try to explain to people why things are funny in an analytical way. It's kind of something you have to, I don't know, just have a bit of a chat about. It tends to work better. But I get what you're saying.
Like Spaceballs.
Yeah. People Sus says, can you do something about the troll who attacks your OB chats? Poor Joshua has dealt with him a bunch, yet he keeps emerging with new accounts. Yeah, I mean, we've obviously got mods there that kind of police the chat. It's the best we can do, really. Generally, there's ways you can kind of mute people or put them in a timeout or whatever. So that's what they tend to do. Blue Collar Loser says, saw the Planet of the Apes last night. The story was average, missed Andy Serkis. The mocap, however, rivals Avatar. Another example that Disney should feel awful. Worth a watch.
Yeah, I mean, technically it's quite impressive, but yeah, that script, it's kind of just a bit lame.
Ghost of Drinker's Liver says, not a film related question, but I was curious whether the drinker has checked out the Tipsy Bartenders videos on YouTube. No, I haven't. What are they? I need to look them up.
Dude, no.
Blue Collar Loser also says, Peter, Jack, and Andy Serkis involved with new Lord of the Rings projects. Drinker, how often do you say the tide has to shift eventually? I want to be excited again, lol. Yeah, I mean, hope springs eternal and all that, and we always like to think like we get a really like a good run of decent movies. Oh, wow, this is it. The change is coming or whatever. You never quite know, but I maintain that ultimately, when the money runs out, they have to do something to fix their business model.
Yeah, it's inevitable, but it's hard to tell when inevitable is. It's around there somewhere.
Between now and inevitable.
Yeah. LC Le Pen, been a hell of a week for video games news as well, eh? Between the Helldivers turnaround, Xbox's boneheaded closures, and the Switch 2 on the horizon, almost needs its own dedicated open bar. Hail to the panel. Thanks, man. I mean, I've already got a video game channel now, but yeah, trying to do a live stream that was all about video games as well. I don't know if I've even got enough time to do all that stuff. I need to like duplicate me somehow. So I've got enough of me to do all this. Joey Jojo Shabadoo says, Fringy, give us the best groundskeeper Willie quote ever.
Oh man, what would be the best one? Oh, there's so many to pick from. I'm not sure. I think the best one is when Principal Skinner, he grounds Bart by tricking him with the Scotch Toberfest. There is no such thing as Scotch Toberfest. There's not. You used me, Skinner. Oh, it's so good.
Everyone in chat's going, grease me up, woman.
Yeah, that's a good one. Okie dokie.
The profile name of that super chat as well is the reference to the guy who comes in. I think it's Homer coming in. He's trying to make up a name, and he says, "My name is Joey Jojo Junior Shabadoo." And then is it Mo that says like that's the worst name I've ever heard? And some guy runs out crying, and then Bonnie says, "Hey, Joey Jojo." Joey Jojo.
They did another thing. Like they did something exactly like that in like where Bart and the family, they go to like Itchy and Scratchy Land, and it's like a piss take of like Jurassic Park, where they're looking in the gift shop for like license plates that say Bart on it, and like you can't find one, but it's got like Bort. And he's like, oh, who the hell calls their kid Bort? And then you just see this little kid next to him going, mommy, buy me that that license plate. And she's like, no, come along, Bort, we have to get out of here.
Yeah, the guy behind her is like, are you talking to me? She's
yeah.
like, no,
my son is also
Bort.
called Bort. And then there's a callback to it later in the episode. Like there's a PA announcement saying we have run out of Bort license plates in the gift shop. We need immediate restock. Northern English Bastard says, to you, Drinker, MauLer, and your fine guests, favorite twist in a TV show ever? For me, the ending of Out Where the Buses Don't Run from Miami Vice.
Mm-hmm. Favorite twist?
It's got to be a TV show as well.
Deadwood.
Yeah, this is open to the panel as well. So,
well, I mean, I would say the original Planet of the Apes when I was a kid.
It's got to be a TV show, bro.
Oh, is that what it? Oh, it's got to be a TV show. Okay. Well, if it's going to be a TV show, the end of the Twilight Zone episode, To Serve Man. That was the first time I ever saw Twilight Zone. I was like 5 years old. And if you haven't seen To Serve Man, when you find out the end, it's pretty shocking, especially when you're 5. Yes.
Which is the one where Burgess Meredith was in the Twilight Zone? Where
Time Enough at Last.
Glass.
He was actually in 4 Twilight Zone episodes.
Is that where he's like a bank manager who just wants to read books all day?
Yes.
Yeah.
When his wife, I'll never forget this. When his wife is revealed, like he hides books around his house, and he finds one of the books, and his wife has found it and drawn on every page of the book, so he can't read it. I mean, this is what a harpy she was, and she did it to all of his books. And in my mind, whenever somebody does something that I disagree with, or somebody yells at me for whatever reason, I think about Burgess Meredith's voice, and he says, "Why, Helen? Why do you do these things?" And that's it, man. Since I was a kid, whenever I've seen somebody doing something effed up, that's what happens in my mind. Because that woman doing those things to books is one of the most evil things I've ever seen anywhere ever.
Yeah,
and
it's great.
Red
Like,
Wedding
he
would count
plays
as a
that.
twist, wouldn't it?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
The what? Sorry.
Red Wedding.
I was thinking the Red
reveal
Wedding.
of-
It's sort of
Oh,
become
yeah.
like less remarkable after the fact now because we're so used to that sort of thing happening. But I vaguely remember at the time it being quite a big deal.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, like seeing a pregnant woman getting stabbed to death, like that's pretty
It's rough.
pretty rough stuff. Yeah, for a TV show like that.
It's also just it's just such a perfect move from Tywin. He dominates so hard with that move, like in terms of his chest. Just like, damn, dude. Mine feels like slightly a cheat, but it's neither a TV show nor a movie in a way. It's the Serenity plus Firefly. You need them both to have the twist of the nature of what's actually happening with to remain a spoiler free, the fucking big twist in Serenity. You probably know what I'm talking about if you've seen it.
Not Tudyk. You're talking about Alan Tudyk's character.
No.
Oh,
I'm talking about. I figure we're doing plot rather than.
Okay.
So what happened, if you know what I mean, on that planet?
It's a good one. That's a good one.
I'm blanking at the moment. Actually, I don't know why. I know that there is one, but like right now, I'm blanking on it.
The very fact Rebel Moon was shorter than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
Didn't he promise there's going to be a 4 hour or 6 hour? Is that just a rumor? It's
Oh no, that's something he's threatened us with. Yeah,
They're on their way, as far as I know.
You know, someone brought up Battlestar Galactica. I did think that was an interesting twist when they were angels, plot wise. I don't know.
I did not like that. I mean, I generally loved the show, but like the story just went completely off the rails in the final season.
I didn't know how they could end it the way that they had set it up with when Starbuck came back and it's like, you're dead, you're not dead, you are. I was like, okay. After that point,
I legit feel like they didn't know what they were doing with that one. It was just, she's a popular character. We want to bring her back. Are we going to do it? I don't know.
They just should have said that. You like her, we brought her back. That's the reason.
Yeah. Because there was always these attempts to like have quasi-religious like tie-ins to Christianity and like birth, death, resurrection, all that sort of thing. The show was just really weak when it tried to implement that stuff. Yeah. The general nuts and bolts of like the humanity aspect of the show, the very grounded sci-fi sort of feel to it, the action that felt very visceral. That stuff was all great. It's just like when it got to the really quasi-religious philosophical stuff, it started to struggle.
Yeah.
But and they killed so much time on. So season 3 is the one where they go down to that planet and it just becomes one extended Iraq War allegory for about basically the entire season. And some good episodes in it, but it takes up so long. Then season 4 comes around. I think there was a writer strike around the time as well, which did not help them when it came to finishing the script up. But you know, as soon as like a significant plot beat hinges on every important character hearing all along the watchtower, you know they're kind of rushing to a conclusion at that point. Like music from the ether is generally not a good writing trick.
To me, every time they pulled a stunt like that, I just went back to my focus, number 6, Trisha Helfer. I was like,
I mean, she was always pleasant to look at, but that was never even contextualized, was it? Like, why that song? Like in a time period which is like hundreds of thousands of years before it would ever be written. It's just
because Hendrix is song,
God.
But
I mean, it is, but does it transcend time and space and reality?
Yes, it does.
That good.
That's why I have him right here on my shelf.
Yeah,
there he is.
Hash-sligging Slasher says, "Howdy, gents. What are your thoughts on Mike Flanagan being an executive producer for Chris Stuckman's movie? Is that true?
Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
Yep.
I mean, executive producers do fuck all, but generally, like he wouldn't have signed up for something like this. He wouldn't have attached his name to it if he hadn't seen a rough cut or something and been quite impressed by it.
I think he said he believes in Chris. He's seen his journey and he wants him to be successful, which I think is really cool to do. Support them filmmakers, especially ones you believe in. I don't have as much faith in Chris Stuckman, but hey, you know what? I'd love to be surprised.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? Like, if Mike has chosen to attach his name to this movie, maybe it's really fucking good.
Maybe.
The possibilities out there. So, hey, I'll be interested to see it when the time comes.
You know, I've often said that you Drinker and Chris Stuckman are sort of, I think, canaries in the coal mine. And I was equating the two of you back to the French critics who wrote for Cahiers du Cinéma back in the 50s. You know, people like Truffaut and Godard. They were critics that eventually transitioned to becoming filmmakers. And I think that's kind of where we're at now. And I think there's really great opportunity, whether you know, selling a product directly to your consumer, as some YouTubers have been doing to great success, putting your money where your mouth is. You know, I think that this could very well be the beginning of something that we're going to see more of. And for you and your film and Stuckman's film to achieve some kind of success, I think bodes very well for what we're going to be seeing in the next decade or so. At least I hope so.
Well, it's never been more accessible than it is now, in terms of, you know, the technology that you need to make a film being a lot cheaper and easier to come by, to edit and all that stuff.
Yeah.
It can definitely be done on a much smaller budget than it was before, and it's within reach of not quite the average man, but like people with very small resources, they can do it, and it's great to see, you know, because the people that do these projects, then they're super passionate about what they're making because it's something they genuinely care about, and they're willing to invest that time and effort into doing it. So yeah, that's the sort of thing I want to see a lot more of.
And you're doing it with your own IP, and Chris Stuckman's project is original as well.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think that's the way to go, and it's something that I think hopefully we'll see more of. You know, with all of us carrying 4K cameras around in our pockets, there's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah. I'll do one more here and finish up. Kedge says this guy didn't win his first Oscar until he turned 70 years old and starred in 38 movies. Be like Godzilla. Never give up on your dreams. Well done to you, Godzilla. You got there in the end.
I think they're making a sequel too, -1.
Yeah, I mean,
-2.
Yeah.
I mean, that would just have to then become just Godzilla 0 or something, you know, it's averaged out. But yeah, the ending left it pretty open. There was that weird thing going on with the girlfriend. Don't know what that was meant to represent, but who knows? I guess we'll get to see it. I'd watch it.
Oh yeah.
Hopefully it maintains the tone of this one, and it's actually got an interesting story to tell. It's not just like generic sequel.
I still haven't seen it in the black and white. I saw the trailers for it, and I still want to see it in the black and white.
It's neat.
Is it just gimmicky, or is it like
I
quite a cool experience?
No, it's cool because it harks back to the original Godzilla, and I think they did a pretty great job with it.
Nice.
It's like the Mad Max Fury Road black and white version. It's kind of a different experience.
Well, I'm going to finish up there, gentlemen, because we're almost at 3 hours that we've been doing this. But it's been a great stream tonight. We've had a nice packed open bar. It's nice to have all these people in for our guests. And yeah, very much appreciate you guys giving up your time for this one.
Absolutely.
Thanks very much for having us.
Thank you.
It's been a blast.
Thank you to chat. Thank you to the mods for doing all their usual awesome work. And thank you for everyone who's super chatted us. We will catch up as we always do at the weekends and put it up on the second channel. But for now, that's all we got for today. So go away now.
Bye.
See you, everybody.